Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of April Tinsley. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the oldest child in her family. She attended elementary school and was a member of the children's choir at her local church. April enjoyed playing with her friends around the neighborhood. On Friday, April 1, 1988, when she turned 8, April came home from school, eager to play. After lunch, she asked her mother if she could visit her friend Nicole, who lived just a few hundred yards away. Her mother agreed, as their neighborhood was very safe. Before April left, her mother reminded her to call Nicole as soon as she got to her house and gave her an umbrella, as it was nearly 3 p.m. and rain was expected. A few minutes later, when she arrived at Nicole's house, April called her mother. Her mother told her to be home by 4 p.m. When that time passed, April still hadn't returned, causing her mother to worry that she might have gotten caught in the rain. She called Nicole's house to check on her. Nicole's mother answered and said that April and Nicole had gone to a nearby playground. It started to rain, and April realized that she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. She told Nicole that she would go back to Nicole's house to get her umbrella, and then come home, since she had promised her mother that she would come home when it started to rain. April returned home first, while Nicole went to another friend's house to play, and the two girls parted ways. When April's mother did not see her daughter return, she called Nicole's mother to ask about the situation, and Nicole's mother told her. April had not come to pick up her umbrella, even though she had left the playground nearly an hour earlier. April's mother was worried, and she informed her husband that their daughter was missing. They both went out to look for April, and some neighbors joined them when they heard about April's disappearance. They searched all the streets connecting Nicole's house, the playground, and their house, but they found no sign of her. Finally, her parents decided to contact the police. The police came to their house, investigated April's information, and began the search. Within hours, many neighbors had joined together to help the Tinsley family search for April, searching the area along the route she often took, but found no sign of her. As night fell, the police began to fear that she might have been kidnapped, believing they would have found her if she had simply gotten lost. It seemed as if she had disappeared completely. The next day, the search area was expanded and news of April's disappearance spread throughout the city. Even with more police and volunteers involved, they still found no trace of her or any clues. April had been missing for 3 days, until April 4th, when a man went jogging about 20 miles from April's home. While running through some fields, he saw a human body lying in a ditch. Alarmed, he called 911 to report the incident. Police quickly arrived at the scene and identified the body as April Tinsley. She was fully clothed, except for one shoe, which was missing. Although officers did not see any obvious signs of trauma, police suspected that April had been murdered. They believed that the perpetrator may have killed her elsewhere and then left her body in the ditch. Near the body, police also discovered an adult toy, but they were unsure if it was related to the case. They later found April's missing shoe across the street. The autopsy results showed that April died of asphyxiation and sexual assault. They estimated that her death occurred within 2 days before her body was discovered, indicating that the perpetrator had kept her alive for some time. The police collected DNA from the body, but at that time, the FBI did not have a DNA database, and DNA analysis was not yet developed. Therefore, the police had to focus on finding new clues. After the body was found, the police appealed to the public through the media to receive more information about the case. 2 important clues emerged. A man contacted police to report that he had driven past the field where April's body was found and had noticed an old blue pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Police thought the truck might have belonged to the killer, and that witnesses might have seen it when the suspect dumped April's body. the second clue was even more important. A woman who lived along the road from the playground to Nicole's house claimed that she had seen a girl who looked like April on the day she went missing. A second witness reported that as April walked down the street, an old blue pickup truck stopped next to her. Moments later, the truck drove away with her. The vehicle blocked the witnesses' view, making it impossible for them to see how the girl got into the truck. The witness also described the driver as a white man, about 30 years old, with blonde hair. Police have created a sketch of the suspect and shared it with the media, hoping that someone will identify him. The FBI soon joined the investigation. Together with the police, they looked into the possible involvement of all the men who had previously been convicted of sex crimes living in April's area and tried to find new leads. The police then received a tip that the suspect's profile matched that of a man who had been involved in some organized crime and had joined Satanism. The police checked him out but found no connection to April's case. However, the police arrested him for another crime. The police continued to follow up on other leads, but they made no progress. This went on for months and eventually, the police hit a dead end. During the investigation into April's murder, police uncovered several other crimes against children and arrested several suspects, but they were unable to identify April's killer. For many years, there were no significant updates on the case. However, in May 1990, a breakthrough occurred. A boy, who lived about 10 miles from where April's body was found, discovered a note on his shed. The note appeared to be from the killer, who confessed to killing April and hinted that more killings might occur in the future. The author of the note also asked if police had found April's second shoe. This led police to suspect that the person who wrote the note was indeed April's killer. At that time, the media had not reported that the April's shoe was found several hundred yards from her body, meaning only the killer would know this information. Another interesting detail is that the message was originally written in pencil and then outlined in marker. This led police to believe that the perpetrator may have left the message months ago and then returned to make it more visible by sketching it. Police decided to release a photo of the message in the hopes that someone would recognize the handwriting, but this effort yielded no leads. A few months later, Fort Wayne residents were shocked to hear that police had discovered the body of a 7-year-old girl in another part of the city. She had been sexually assaulted and died of asphyxiation. Because of the alarming similarities to April's case, police suspected that the same killer was responsible for both murders. However, FBI analysts believed that the two cases involved two different perpetrators. No progress was made in either case until 1995, when it was confirmed that the second murder was committed by a deceased family friend. As a result, the case was closed and police no longer linked it to April's murder. Police are also awaiting new messages from the killer. His original message said he enjoyed taunting police. Years passed without any new evidence. However, in 2004, the situation changed dramatically. A girl from Fort Wayne discovered a Ziploc plastic bag in her bicycle basket containing a terrifying note. She immediately gave it to her parents, who then contacted the police. The note read, "Hello, honey, I've been watching you. I'm the one who kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered April Tinsley. I have a gift for you. You will be my next victim if you don't call the police and if I don't see this note on the local news tomorrow. I will destroy your house, kill everyone but you. You will be mine." Police were certain that the author of the note was April's killer. Along with the note, they found the used condom, which was sent for laboratory analysis. By 2004, DNA testing was commonly used, and experts had already developed a DNA profile from the semen found on April's body. The analysis revealed that the DNA from the condom matched this profile, but the suspect was not listed in the FBI database. The police reopened April's case and soon received a report about a second note. Another girl had discovered a plastic bag containing a similar message. The note stated that the writer had killed April Tinsley and threatened to kill her as well. Inside the bag was another used condom, which also contained the DNA of the same man. In the following months, police received 2 more reports of similar notes found by other girls. In these cases, the perpetrator included Polaroid photos of his genitals. Police examined the images for clues to identify the suspect. But they only found the green patterned bed sheet in the background, which was on the killer's bed. They searched for stores that sold similar bedding, but this effort did not yield any leads. Over the course of a few months, the perpetrator left for notes, but then he suddenly stopped communicating for years. In 2009, the FBI released a profile of the killer based on eyewitness descriptions of his appearance, hoping to generate new leads. However, this did not help the Fort Wayne police. The case remained a top priority for a number of reasons. Most importantly, they wanted to bring justice to April and hold the killer accountable. The killer also taunted the police with his text messages, confident that he would never be caught. He even threatened other girls and left his DNA for the police to find. Police collected numerous biological samples over the years, but April's killer was never matched to the FBI database. This means he had not been arrested for serious crimes and was still at large. In 2012, April's case was featured on a popular television show about unsolved cases, but with no new leads, the case went cold again. In 2015, police reopened the investigation and contacted Parabon, a company that provides creative services to law enforcement. Experts there create portraits based on DNA samples, and this approach has helped solve several cases. Police contacted Parabon, who created a portrait of the suspect in the case in April. The portrait was posted online and shared with the media in the hope that someone would recognize the person. Unfortunately, they did not receive any useful leads. However, the police were determined to continue their investigation. In 2018, they contacted Parabon again, this time to use a new method called genetic genealogy. Experts will take a DNA sample and search public genetic databases to find potential relatives of the DNA sample owner, even if they are distant relatives. They often find thousands of people, then research their family tree and identify someone who fits the criteria of the perpetrator, such as gender, age, place of residence at the time of the crime. The special thing about this method is that the DNA owner does not need to be in any stored database. This method identifies through relatives. The police investigating April's case sent the killer's DNA sample to Parabon again and waited for the results. Tracing the family ties took months as experts analyzed the extensive data. They eventually told police they had narrowed the DNA lineage down to 2 brothers living in Fort Wayne. The police's next step was to find out if one of the brothers was the killer. They tracked both men down and collected their trash, hoping experts could extract DNA samples from it. 30 years after April's death, police found a DNA match between samples taken from April's body and a condom found at the scene, leading police to John Miller, 59. He lived in a small town called Grail, near where April's body was found. He was 29 years old at the time of the murder and lived in a trailer. The police's next step was to take a DNA sample directly from John R. and question him. When police approached his trailer, they informed him that they wanted to ask him some questions at the station. John inquired about the reason for their visit, and one officer asked him to guess. He then replied, "April Tinsley." The police decided to take John to the station for further questioning. During the ride, he chatted comfortably with the police. When they began questioning John, he confessed to kidnapping and killing April. According to John, on the day April disappeared, he deliberately went to Fort Wayne and drove around the streets looking for a girl to kidnap. Finding April on a deserted street, he stopped and told her to get into his car. He said April silently agreed, which the police found strange. However, witnesses did not hear any screams or signs of a struggle, so the police did not rule out the possibility that John convinced April to get into the car willingly. He took her to his trailer, sexually assaulted her, and killed her. He then loaded her body into his pickup truck, drove to the fields, and dumped her in a ditch. He also admitted that the adult toys found at the scene belonged to him. 6 months after his arrest, when John Miller's first trial began, John, on the advice of his attorney, pleaded not guilty. John received a plea deal. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but if John admitted guilt, the sentence would be replaced with a prison sentence. Ultimately, Miller accepted the plea deal, confessed his guilt in court, and was sentenced to 80 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2058, when he will be 99 years old. April's mother, who attended the trial, was disappointed that John was not given the death penalty, but admitted that given his age, the chances of him being released were slim. April's father was unable to attend the trial due to health reasons, but he expressed gratitude to the police for their efforts in finding his daughter's killer. The case of Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh attempted to follow in his family's footsteps by pursuing a law degree from the University of North Carolina, where he met his future wife, Margaret Maggie Branton. They started dating in 1991 and got married 2 years later, on August 14, 1993, at the Second Presbyterian Church in South Carolina. Alex and Maggie had 2 sons, Richard Buster Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. Alex joined his family's law firm, PMPD, as a personal injury attorney, aiming to continue his family's legacy. However, unlike his ancestors, Alex misused the power and influence his family's firm provided, covering up financial crimes, theft, and possibly even murder. For over a decade, Alex's dishonest dealings went unnoticed until his youngest son, Paul, was involved in a fatal boating accident. This incident was the latest in a series of suspicious deaths surrounding the Murdaugh family, leading people to speculate that these accidents were not coincidental and were instead part of a larger cover-up, given the family's history and resources. Here's what happened on February 23, 2019. Paul Murdaugh, fresh out of high school, took his family's boat to Pucas Island for a party with friends. The group, including his girlfriend Morgan Dowie, Anthony Cook, and Miley Allman, wanted an unsupervised night of fun. They planned a house party and oyster roast on the island. To make the night complete, Paul used his older brother's ID to buy beer and hard liquor. They left the Murdaugh River House around 7 p.m. and continued partying until midnight. Feeling restless, Paul suggested driving the boat to downtown Beaufort, where he and his friend Connor had 2 rounds of shots at around 1 a.m. As they headed back to the boat, a surveillance camera caught a tender moment between Anthony and Mallory. Paul, who was heavily intoxicated, started acting strangely on a boat ride with friends. At 1:15 a.m., the group got back on the water, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Paul drove the boat in circles, showing signs of intoxication, and got into an argument with the others. Anthony wanted to get out on a nearby rock, but Paul refused. GPS footage later showed that the boat's speed increased at some point. Although Paul denied deliberately speeding up, he was in control of the wheel. The boat crashed into Arrow Creek Bridge at 2:20 a.m., throwing Mallory into the water. The others were severely injured. Connor broke his jaw, and Morgan's hand was badly hurt. Connor called 911, and help arrived soon after. When the deputy sheriff arrived, he saw blood in the main compartment and a large split in the hull from the impact. All the teenagers involved were extremely drunk, and everyone except Anthony required hospital treatment. Paul refused treatment despite being extremely agitated and having a blood alcohol level of 0.243, significantly higher than the legal limit. The search for Mallory's body took 8 days, and she was found to have died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and drowning. Despite multiple eyewitnesses stating that Paul was out of control while driving the boat, he was not arrested or charged. This led to rumors that Alex Murdaugh had used his influence to protect his son from justice. In March 2019, the Murdaugh family was served with a wrongful death lawsuit. Mallory's family alleged that Paul's mother, Maggie, was aware that her son was drunk when they went boating and that Buster had helped them obtain fake IDs to buy alcohol. Paul was finally charged with 3 felonies on April 18, 2019, but he never made it to court because he died before his trial. A series of mysterious deaths have been linked to the Murdaugh family. One incident involved Stephen Smith, a gay teenager, who was found dead on July 8, 2015. His official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and it was initially ruled a hit-and-run incident with no suspect arrested. However, Stephen's mother believed he was the victim of a hate crime. There were rumors that Stephen was in a relationship with Alex Murdaugh's oldest son, Buster, and that Buster might have been involved in Stephen's death. Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, died on February 26, 2018, due to complications from a severe head injury. Alex Murdaugh claimed that his dogs had caused her to trip and fall, but there was no autopsy to confirm this account. The case was reopened on March 22, 2023, and it was revealed that Gloria's death was actually a murder, although no suspects have been named. Alex Murdaugh's family was involved in a wrongful death lawsuit after his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died in 2018. The lawsuit resulted in a $4.3 million insurance policy settlement, but the money never reached Satterfield's sons. Instead, Murdaugh allegedly conspired with his friend Corey Fleming, a lawyer and godfather to one of Murdaugh's sons, to steal the payout. The money was diverted to Murdaugh's bank account, and the Satterfield family was never notified. Satterfield's sons filed a new civil lawsuit against Murdaugh in September 2021. On the same day, state investigators opened a criminal investigation into Satterfield's death, citing inconsistencies in the coroner's report. The Satterfield family allowed authorities to exhume Satterfield's body for further investigation. Meanwhile, Murdaugh was facing numerous financial and embezzlement charges. He was allegedly involved in a money laundering and painkiller ring with his distant cousin Curtis Smith, which lasted from 2013 to 2021. On September 4, 2021, Murdaugh orchestrated a scheme in which Smith shot him in an attempt to collect a $10 million life insurance policy. However, the bullet only caused superficial injuries, and Murdaugh was able to call 911 himself. Days later, Murdaugh confessed to the scheme and was charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. He surrendered himself and was taken into custody. 2 days later, he announced his resignation from his family's law firm and entered rehab. However, it was soon revealed that Murdaugh had misappropriated $792,000 from his law firm. His law license was indefinitely suspended in September 2021. Investigators continued to uncover numerous financial crimes, tax evasions, and embezzlements committed by Murdaugh. After leaving rehab, Murdaugh was arrested again and charged with 2 felony counts of obtaining property by false pretenses. He was denied bond and later indicted on 27 counts of financial misconduct, accused of stealing money from clients, lawyers, and the Satterfield family. Alex Murdaugh faced additional charges on December 9, 2021, with 21 new counts added to the existing 27, bringing the total to 48. The charges included forgery, money laundering, computer crimes, breach of trust, and obtaining signature or property by false pretenses. It was estimated that Murdaugh had stolen over $6.2 million from his victims. The state's investigation into his business dealings took months, with new charges emerging almost daily. By June 2022, the charges against him had risen to 81, and by the time he was formally disbarred on July 13, 2022, he faced 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits. One of the victims' mothers filed a legal claim against the estates of Margaret and Paul Murdaugh, raising questions about the character of the once prominent attorney. Could he be hiding something even more sinister such as the murder of his wife and son. What could have been his motive? The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLAD, revisited the double murder case, considering new information gathered during the investigation into Murdo's financial crimes. They discovered that Alex and Maggie Murdo's marriage was troubled, and Maggie was living apart from her husband at their beach home on Edisto Island. Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, told law enforcement that Maggie had not planned to see Alex on the night of the murders. Alex had asked Maggie to meet him at the family's hunting lodge, where she and her younger son were later found shot dead near the dog kennels. Alex claimed to have taken a long nap before leaving to visit his ailing mother, who suffered from dementia. He stated that he was away for 45 minutes to an hour and a half and found his wife and son dead upon his return. However, law enforcement suspected that Alex's timeline was questionable and lacked a clear motive for the murders. The investigation revealed that weeks before the murder, the state grand jury had subpoenaed Alex Murdo's finances, which threatened to expose his financial wrongdoings. Additionally, his law firm had discovered his misappropriation of company funds, and he was confronted about it on June 7, 2021, the day of the murder. State authorities believed that the financial pressure had pushed Alex to hatch a plan to divert attention from his crimes and garner sympathy in the public eye. 13 months after the fatal shooting, Alex Murdo was charged with the murders of his wife and son. The prosecutor alleged that Murdo had shot and killed his wife and son at close range with a shotgun and an AR-style rifle. The murder weapons were never found. Murdo's defense team argued that two shooters were involved due to the different weapons used. Expert witness testimony suggested that the shooter was likely between 5'2" and 5'4" tall, which ruled out Alex Murdo as a suspect due to his 6'4" height. However, under cross-examination, the expert admitted that there were other possible explanations for the bullet trajectory beyond the shooter's height. The investigation revealed that Maggie was shot with 300 blackout ammunition from an AR-style rifle, and a box of this ammo was found at the Murdo family estate. Prosecutors argued that Alex killed his wife and son to gain sympathy and avoid accountability for his financial crimes. Alex's lawyers countered that this didn't make sense, as it would only shift attention to himself and put him in the spotlight of a murder investigation. Alex was a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but his lawyer claimed he had an ironclad alibi for the night of the murders and no motive to kill his family. Prosecutors presented two videos taken on the night of the murder, which appeared to show Alex wearing different shirts. The Snapchat video taken from Paul's phone showed Alex wearing a blue shirt, while the body cam footage showed him wearing a different shirt. Investigators couldn't find the blue shirt, and prosecutors suggested Alex tried to influence a key witness's account of what he was wearing. Cell phone data and testimony from Alex's mother's caregiver confirmed that Alex was only at his mother's home for 15 to 20 minutes, contradicting his claim of staying for 45 minutes to an hour and a half. The most crucial piece of evidence was a video found on Paul's phone, recorded at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the murders. The video featured the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex, placing Alex at the scene of the crime. This contradicted his previous alibi and confirmed his presence at the dog kennels where the murders occurred. Alex testified that he didn't shoot his wife or son, but admitted to lying about his alibi. Alex Murdo changed his story, claiming that his opioid addiction and resulting paranoia led him to lie to law enforcement. However, prosecutors argued that Murdo fabricated this excuse after murdering his wife and son. They believed he used his wife's phone to create an alibi by making calls and sending texts, including "Call me, babe," at 9:47 p.m. Phone data showed that Murdo's and his wife's phones locked simultaneously, and Alex's phone recorded a sudden increase in steps around the time of the murder. Prosecutors suggested this was evidence of him trying to hide or dispose of evidence, But his lawyers disputed this, pointing out that the step patterns on Alex's phone did not match his wife's. The decisive evidence came from a video recorded at the dog kennels. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found Murdaugh guilty on all counts on March 2, 2023. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Additionally, he received a 5-year sentence for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 22 financial crimes as part of a deal, but maintains his innocence in the murders. He appealed his conviction on March 9, 2023. In a surprise move, his lawyers filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Rebecca Hill, a court clerk, had engaged in jury tampering. Hill denies the allegations, which include advising jurors to disregard Murdaugh's testimony and other defense evidence, pressuring them to reach a quick guilty verdict, and misrepresenting critical information to the trial judge. A hearing is scheduled for Murdaugh's lawyers to present evidence and witnesses to support their claim. However, a judge has not yet been assigned to preside over the hearing. With over 100 financial and drug crime charges pending, as well as multiple lawsuits, it is clear that the Alex Murdaugh case is far from over. The case of Alexandra Morgan. Alexandra Morgan, known as Alexandra to friends and family, is a single mother of 2 children, aged 4 and 11. They live in Wilsley Pound, Cranbrook, Kent. Alexandra has lost contact with the children's father and has had to raise them on her own, which has not been easy. According to some sources, she works as a dog groomer. Alexandra is described as a dynamic and ambitious woman who is always looking after her children. She wants her children to have a better life and has worked hard to achieve it. On November 13, 2021, Alexandra met her parents and left her children in their care. She said she was going on a spa holiday with friends for 3 days. However, by November 17, Alexandra had not returned to pick up her children as scheduled. Her parents began to worry because they could not contact Alexandra by phone or text, which was very unusual. After several unsuccessful attempts to find their daughter, they decided to report Alexandra missing to the police. Kent police suspect that Alexandra Morgan's disappearance is related to a crime. They began their investigation by looking into the spa where Alexandra said she was going to go with friends. The police also wanted to identify these friends. Start an investigation. Police have obtained video footage from a gas station in Cranbrook where Alexandra was last seen. They are trying to locate her by looking for her white Mini Cooper. On the morning of November 14th, Alexandra went to the gas station to fill up, made a few purchases, and then left. The video shows nothing unusual. Rose McCauley, the petrol station manager who has known Alexandra for 17 years, was there when Alexandra bought £10 worth of petrol, a cup of coffee, and a snack on the morning she went missing. Rose said that no one knew what had happened to her or where she had gone. Rose continued that a friend and she had searched all over Hastings, but Alexandra was nowhere to be seen. She said that Alexandra wasn't shy, so she didn't think Alexandra was scared to go home. Rose just hoped nothing bad had happened and that Alexandra would get back safely. It was worrying, she added. When Alexandra arrived that Sunday morning, she was very well dressed, with more makeup than usual, her hair done and some eye-catching clothes. She arrived earlier than usual, looking happy and smiling. Alexandra's friends mentioned that in 2018, she shared on social media about being stalked by a stalker. In 2019, she posted a photo with the caption, "Hello Stalker," and included a message asking the stalker to stop following her page. A police spokesman said that it was unusual for Alexandra to have not contacted her family and that they were treating it as a possible murder. As the investigation continued, they were appealing for anyone who might have seen Alexandra or her white Mini Cooper with a black top to contact them. He added that even if people were not sure what they saw, they should report any suspicious information. Alexandra was described as a woman approximately 168 centimeters tall, of slim build, with shoulder-length brown hair. She was last seen wearing a knee-length green quilted jacket, a black top underneath, ripped blue jeans, knee-high black boots, and a silver necklace. Usually, when someone goes missing, they don't leave any traces behind to help the police investigate. Many missing cases remain unsolved. However, Alexandra Morgan's case is different. She left behind the last digital traces that helped the police find clues to her fate. Not only that, these traces also revealed some shocking secrets. Further investigation helped the police find out more information about Alexandra. She wanted to improve her finances, so she started working as a call girl and advertised her services online, without telling her family and friends. Women in this profession are among the most vulnerable. Everyone knows that they face risks, because it is impossible to know in advance whether the next customer is normal or dangerous. This job is unsafe. According to the investigation, Alexandra had an appointment with a regular customer before she went missing. The police have arrested this man. On November 25, 2021, they arrested a 40-year-old man, Mark Brown, from St. Leonard's-on-Sea on suspicion of murder. Mark Brown, a construction worker who is married with a son. His family were completely unaware of his secret life. Sussex police said that before Alexandra went missing, she had met Mark several times, and he had even bought her a Mini Cooper. Their first meeting took place on June 8, 2021, after Mark spotted her on an adult website. They met at her home in Sissinghurst, near Cranbrook, Kent. Things went well, and they continued to meet occasionally after that. The second meeting took place on June 21st, nearly 2 weeks later. This time, Alexandra went to Little Bridge Farm near Hastings, Kent, a property Mark rented to meet women and for other purposes. They met 7 more times in August and September. Alexandra did not realize she was falling into a trap. On October 23, 2021, Mark sent her a text message asking if she would like to engage in a risk-free business transaction. He made an offer that involved £100,000 for 35 days at a hotel he would protect, a new ID, a straight car, and money for shopping. Mark asked her to do some simple tasks: go out for a smoke, pack the money, and buy a few things. After receiving this offer, Alexandra did some online research, which showed that she wanted to improve her children's lives. She learned about the minimum deposit for buying a house in 2021. Alexandra also intended to use the money to start a business. She searched for information such as profits from opening a sunbed shop in the UK and taxes to pay on £100,000. These actions showed Alexandra's character and desire to improve her life. Alexandra lied to her parents that she was going to the spa with friends, but in fact she was planning to meet Mark at the farm. On the morning of November 14th, she left home and was recorded on CCTV buying petrol in Cranbrook at 7:20 a.m. She arrived at Little Bridge Farm at around 8 a.m. 3 days later, on November 17th, Mark drove Alexandra's car to Holmhurst Lane, St. Leonard's, after replacing the real number plates with fake ones. The following day, November 18th, Alexandra's mother reported her daughter to the police because she had not picked her up and had stopped communicating. On November 23rd, police discovered CCTV footage of Alexandra's car following Mark's Jaguar to Little Bridge Farm. Kent police sealed off the entrance to the farm and interviewed Mark. He admitted meeting Alexandra but claimed she had left after 45 minutes. Mark agreed to allow police to take his fingerprints and DNA. 2 days later, on November 25th, police arrested Mark as the prime suspect in Alexandra Morgan's disappearance. Before we get into what happened to Alexandra, we need to go back to when she met Mark Brown. At that time, Mark had a wife named Leah Ware. She was 33, and she was a mother of 3 who does not have custody of her children. Leah first met Mark on March 25, 2018, through a prostitution website where she advertised her services. A few years later, this same website is where Mark met Alexandra Morgan. In late 2018, Mark and Leah began a relationship and moved into an apartment together. After 6 months, when their lease expired, Leah moved into a shipping container at Mark S. Littlebridge Farm. Mark describes their relationship as a roller coaster of ups and downs. Leah has had a complicated life. She received weekly benefits, which were usually administered by Mark. She had a history of drug use and mental illness, but many said she was trying to improve herself in order to gain custody of her children. Mark and Leah were in a 3-year relationship before Leah mysteriously disappeared in May 2021. On the evening of May 5th and early morning of May 6th, Leah was with Jack Tyler, a friend and convicted drug dealer. They used drugs together and had an intimate relationship that night. This was the last time anyone saw Leah. The last call from her phone was made at 8:55 a.m. on May 7th. Police believe Leah died that day. On June 8, 2021, Mark met Alexandra for the first time at her home. The meeting went well and Alexandra found Mark to be a reasonable and generous man. However, she did not know that just a month earlier, Leah, who had been in a relationship with Mark, had disappeared without a trace. During the investigation, detectives discovered important text messages from Mark. He sent them to his ex-girlfriend from high school 5 days after meeting Alexandra Morgan. However, the content of the messages had nothing to do with Alexandra and were about Leah. The message reads, "I'll try to be careful. This happened recently. It's a nasty thing to get rid of. Just an old oil drum, 5 liters of diesel, and everything is gone. It burns so hot, it almost glows white. My actions are heartbreaking. It's ironic that a psychopath has a conscience. Investigators suspect Alexandra Morgan is dead and may not be Mark's only victim. Sussex police are appealing to the public for help in locating Leah or her body, as well as any information relating to her disappearance." After arresting Mark on November 25, 2021, police searched his farm and found a container that showed signs of having been recently burned. Inside the container, experts found bone and tooth remains. Tests confirmed that these were those of Alexandra Morgan. In a joint statement, Kent and Sussex police expressed their condolences to Alexandra and Leah's families. They confirmed that Alexandra's remains had been found, but Leah's remains have not yet been found. The investigation is ongoing and police are appealing for anyone with information. Police described Leah as a white woman, 168 centimeters tall, of slim build, with very long black hair and blue eyes. She had 3 tattoos, a dragon on her right leg, Chinese characters on her right hip, and a fairy sitting on a flower with the name Ryan on her right leg. The search of Mark's house lasted about a month and ended on January 7, 2022. During the investigation, police discovered the skeleton of a Pomeranian dog at the bottom of the pond, with a heavy object tied to its neck. Investigators believe this was Leah's dog, which Mark threw into the pond after killing Leah. On February 1, 2022, police charged Mark with the murder of Leah Ware, although they did not find her remains. Mark had previously been charged with the murder of Alexandra Morgan. Mark initially denied all charges. However, when police presented evidence of him burning Alexandra Morgan's body, Mark admitted to Alexandra's death, but maintained that it was an accident. Mark Brown's trial began on October 17, 2022. During the trial, new information about the 2 cases was revealed. The jury heard that after Leah Ware went missing on May 7, 2021, Mark regularly used her new bank card to withdraw money from her account each week. The bank card was sent to the address of his sister Cheryl. In July 2021, the jury was informed that Mark had twice withdrawn £200 from Leah Ware's account shortly after transferring £200 into his own. When asked why, Mark explained that he could have used her £200 and then paid it back, as at that point, someone owed him £430, so he could have paid it back. Prosecuting attorney Duncan Atkinson asked if it was a coincidence that Leah had died after getting a new bank card. A surprised Mark replied that he didn't understand what Duncan meant and that, as far as he knew, Leah was still alive. Duncan continued by asking if Mark was trying to take Ms. Leah's money and pointed out that Leah was in a place where money didn't mean anything. Mark was confused and said he didn't understand what Duncan was talking about at all, adding that it sounded like they were talking about two different people. During the trial for Alexandra Morgan's death, Mark maintained that it was an accident. He explained that Alexandra slipped and fell on a piece of equipment in the workshop he rented at Little Bridge Farm, causing her to hit her head. When he rushed to her, he found Alexandra bleeding profusely. He grabbed a towel to try to stop the bleeding. But when he lifted her head to put the towel under, more blood came out. Prosecuting attorney Duncan Atkinson objected to the defendant's testimony, stating that when the defendant first saw the victim lying on her back on the ground, there was a lot of blood around her head. This clearly showed that she was seriously injured and needed immediate help, especially medical attention. This was obvious before the defendant did anything else. Mark replied that he was panicking and his first reaction was to grab a towel to stop the bleeding. After performing CPR and checking for breathing by holding a mirror to Alexandra Morgan's mouth and nose, Mark confirmed that she was dead. Over the next 5 minutes, he did 3 things. He used his sweater to block the blood, he went outside to vomit, and he retrieved his phone to call 911. He explained that he then decided to cover up the whole thing by wrapping Alexandra in a sleeping bag and wrapping a towel around her head to stop the bleeding. He questioned how he could prove it was an accident and admitted that the decision to cover it up was stupid and the worst mistake of his life. Mark then decided to dispose of Alexandra's body using an incinerator he had built from an old oil drum earlier that year and which he had often used to burn rubbish. "I had heard stories about burning dead bodies," he said, "and I didn't want anyone to stumble upon a body lying around." Mark therefore maintained that he had nothing to do with Leah Ware's disappearance and believed she was still alive, while Alexandra's death was assumed an accident. At the trial, the court heard testimony from Mark's boss, Alan, who said that Mark had warned him that the police might come to arrest him. This conversation took place on November 24th. When Alan asked why the police might arrest him, Mark replied, "For double murder." This answer was significant because Mark implicitly admitted that Leah Ware was dead and that Alexandra Morgan's death was not an accident. Mark denied those words, claiming he only mentioned a 25-year sentence for one murder, not a double murder. Prosecutor Duncan asked about the murder, and Mark admitted his feelings about Alexandra's case made him act as he did, despite his inability to prove his innocence. The jury also heard that Mark had deliberately smeared Alexandra and Leah reputations, as the prosecutor put it, to create a false image of the women. What people should remember about Leah and Alexandra is that they were always smiling and happy in life. They both deserve to be remembered by their loved ones for the wonderful qualities they were. On December 1st, 2022, a jury of 12 found Mark, 41, guilty on all counts. Judge Nicholas Hilliard said, "This is an extremely serious case and the impact on the victim's family is immeasurable." He announced that Mark would be sentenced to life in prison and that he would have to decide what minimum time Mark should serve, or even whether to grant clemency. The judge stressed that if Mark revealed what he had done to Leah Ware's body, he would take that information into account when sentencing. However, Mark did not take this opportunity. Before the judge delivered his verdict, the court heard from Leah Ware's mother, Rebecca Martin, about the impact the case had had on the family. "Mark continues to cause our family pain by not revealing what happened. Leah lost her life because Mark Brown wanted to satisfy his dark desires, she said. He controlled and manipulated every aspect of her life. When she was no longer of any value, he abandoned her like a lifeless object. The court also heard from Alexandra Morgan's parents, who said Alexandra was intelligent, energetic, and determined to succeed. Despite the challenges she faced, she overcame them and held out hope for her future and the child she loved dearly. On January 13, 2023, the court sentenced Mark Brown to 2 life terms. He will be eligible for parole after 49 years. Judge Hilliard imposed the sentence in absentia because Mark refused to appear. He said, "No sentence can ever measure the number of lives lost. Nothing can undo the defendant's actions, it cannot. His conscience is not troubled by what he has done." The case of Andrea Lohagen. Andrea Lohagen was born on January 6, 1977, in Bad Belzig, Germany, to a tight-knit family that consisted of her mother, father, and sister. They lived in a newly built residential complex. As children, Andrea and her sister were known for being obedient and diligent in their studies, which made their parents incredibly proud. By the time Andrea turned 16, she had developed into a stunning young woman and an outstanding student, earning her numerous admirers. Andrea and her sister focused primarily on their studies and socializing with friends at parties, avoiding any unwholesome or troubling pursuits. On October 7, 1993, during the autumn break, 16 years old, Andrea spent the day at a local shopping center with her parents. With only 1 year of high school remaining, Andrea was on the cusp of a significant milestone, looking forward to completing her exams and embarking on her journey into adulthood. Andrea harbored dreams of attending university, building a career, and eventually starting a family of her own. The thought of entering this new phase of her life filled her with immense excitement and anticipation. During their outing to the shopping center, Andrea bought new shoes and jeans. She excited to wear them to a party at the club that was coming up soon. That evening, Andrea, a high school student, planned to attend a gathering at the local youth center, where her friends and acquaintances were waiting for her. The center was only a 15-minute walk from Andrea's home in the small town of Bad Belzig. Since the town was considered very safe, with no prior incidents of attacks or crimes, Andrea's parents felt comfortable allowing her to walk to the party alone. Andrea was expected to return home by 10 p.m. to watch a horror movie with her mother, as was their evening routine. However, when Andrea did not come home on time, her family assumed she would be home in a few hours. Andrea's friends who were at the party said she never showed up, which caused them to become worried. This was unusual behavior for Andrea, who was known for being responsible and punctual. She had never been late before, so her friends were worried. Unfortunately, it was difficult to reach Andrea directly, as mobile phones were not widely used at the time, and the youth center didn't have a landline phone. Her friends would have had to leave the party to call her from another location. Nevertheless, the group chose not to jump to conclusions and stayed at the club. They thought Andrea might be dealing with family issues that prevented her from attending the party. Despite the youth center being close by, none of them tried to check on her. The girls assumed Andrea was either running late or grounded at home, and they continued to enjoy the party. However, when Andrea failed to return home by midnight, her mother grew worried. Normally, Andrea would be home by this time, watching another horror movie. At first, Andrea's mother thought she came home late because she had gone out with friends or visited someone's house. But as the hours passed and Andrea didn't show up, her mother became increasingly alarmed. She tried to contact her daughter's friends, with whom Andrea was supposed to be visiting that evening, but none of them were home. This left her unable to get any information about Andrea's whereabouts. Later, one of the girls finally answered, but she had no information about Andrea. The mother became increasingly worried, realizing that her daughter could not stay out so late, as she had to go to school the next day. At 1 a.m., the mother's concern reached a breaking point. She woke up her husband, and they set out in their car at 1:30 a.m. to search for Andrea. They spent hours searching the area around Bad Belzig but found nothing. They visited the youth center, but Andrea wasn't there. Andrea's friends were unable to provide a clear explanation for her disappearance. It was also unknown whether she went missing while heading to the club or after leaving it. Most partygoers had already left, and the remaining youths couldn't provide much information. Around 4 a.m., Andrea's frantic parents reported her disappearance to the local police. However, the police responded slowly and failed to conduct a timely search for Andrea. The police officers initially thought that Andrea had just gone out and would come back home by herself in the morning, once she was sober. However, her parents were certain that something terrible had happened to her. They knew Andrea wouldn't run away because she had no reason to do so. All Andrea's belongings and money were still at home, she wasn't dating anyone, and none of her friends had seen her that night. A week went by before the police started investigating Andrea's disappearance. Up until then, her parents had been searching the town on their own. They had contacted all the local hospitals, but none of them had any information about Andrea. As the search continued without any success, Andrea's parents became increasingly suspicious of a plot of land formerly owned by Andrea's ex-boyfriend's grandfather. Andrea and her ex-boyfriend had broken up shortly before she went missing. There were reports that her ex-boyfriend was struggling to cope with their breakup. The outside of the property appeared abandoned, except for a small, old shed that caught the attention of Andrea's parents. They suspected that Andrea's ex-boyfriend might be connected to her disappearance. They thought it was possible that he had ambushed her on her way to the club, attacked her, and taken her. The parents immediately contacted Andrea's ex-boyfriend, but he denied any involvement. He stated that he was at home for the entire evening and night, and his family members were ready to confirm his alibi. However, Andrea's family didn't believe him. The police were informed by Andrea's parents about a suspicious piece of land owned by her ex-boyfriend's grandfather, and they agreed to investigate. It wasn't until a week after Andrea's disappearance that the police took the investigation seriously. Detectives started questioning the people who were at the youth club on the night Andrea went missing. Many of the partygoers were friends and acquaintances of Andrea, but their statements didn't shed any light on the case. The teenagers who frequented the club often got their dates and days mixed up, making their accounts confusing and unclear. Some people claimed to have seen Andrea at the party, but others disagreed. Initially, investigators thought Andrea might have arrived at the party, then gotten lost in the crowd or left with someone she knew, or possibly been attacked. This theory seemed believable, given that parties with teenagers often involve alcohol, which can lead to incidents when people are leaving. However, after talking to more witnesses, it became clear that Andrea never actually made it to the party, which was confirmed by her friends who were waiting for her. Andrea, who was known for her beauty at school, didn't show up to meet her friends. Detectives believed the accounts from Andrea's closest friends were the most trustworthy. Police have thoroughly checked all routes Andrea might have taken to get to the club. They launched a large-scale search operation, involving trained dogs and many volunteers. Despite their extensive efforts, they couldn't find any signs of Andrea. Numerous press conferences and TV reports were held to ask citizens for help in finding Andrea and warning them of potential danger. Andrea's parents and law enforcement worked together to investigate her disappearance. They made appeals for negotiation in case she was abducted, set up hotlines for witness tips, and offered monetary rewards. However, all efforts were unsuccessful due to a lack of evidence or leads. Many tips were verified, but they turned out to be false. The detectives were only able to piece together a rough timeline of incident leading up to Andrea's disappearance. On the evening of Thursday, October 7th, 1993, Andrea returned home from a shopping center with her parents around 6 p.m. She went to her room, listened to music, and looked at her new clothes. The family had dinner together, and Andrea planned to attend a party at the youth club afterwards. She tried to contact a friend to go together, but her friend was already at the club and couldn't be reached. Andrea decided to go alone, and her parents didn't know what she did next. Investigators suspected that Andrea may have been a victim of sexual assault. They thought that her attractive appearance might have caught the attention of a predator, leading to a crime. To investigate, detectives made a list of Andrea's ex-boyfriends and admirers and checked their alibis. Investigation found that each of the suspects had a reliable alibi for the time of the incident, making it unlikely they were involved. Unfortunately, the surveillance system at the time was relatively underdeveloped, making the investigation more difficult. Detectives started looking for witnesses who might have seen what happened to Andrea. They found out that she had taken a shortcut to the club that evening, and several people had seen her along the way. According to their accounts, Andrea had passed by a group of young people and a couple of teenagers. But she didn't know any of them, so she just kept walking. The last people to see Andrea alive were two boys, 13 years old Robin and 14 years old David. By law, their identities and photos were kept private, but detectives were able to track them down and take their statements. The boys said they had simply nodded at Andrea and then gone their separate ways. After that, Andrea seemed to disappear. It became clear that Andrea never made it to the meeting spot with her friends, which meant something terrible must have happened to her on the way. The path she took was a little-known shortcut that mostly only local residents were familiar with. So, the search for suspects focused on people who lived in the nearby houses. Immediately, the police investigation focused on Robin and David, the two teenagers who were the last to see Andrea alive. Both boys came from difficult home environments and lived close to the Andrea family's residence. They were familiar with the path Andrea had taken. Although they were young, Robin and David had a history of minor crimes, including thefts and break-ins. However, there was not enough evidence to accuse them of a serious crime like assault and abduction. Due to Robin and David's young age, the suspicions against them were eventually dropped. The case stalled, and for the next 7 years, there were no new developments. Then, on July 7, 2000, a local resident stumbled upon a horrifying discovery while out for a walk. His dog found a human skull and brought it to him, laying it on the ground. At first, the man thought the skull was a ball, but after he realized it was actually a human skull that had been stripped of its flesh. The skull had a hole in the occipital bone. At first, the resident thought the dog had discovered old remains from World War II, as burials from that time were commonly found in the area. To be safe, the resident informed the police. When detectives received the news, they quickly went to the scene with search dogs. The location where the skull was found belonged to Andrea's former boyfriend. After a lengthy and thorough search, a complete human skeleton was found behind the door of a partially collapsed shed, hidden under a pile of construction debris. The skeleton's poor condition made initial identification impossible. Searching the nearby utility building did not turn up any clues, personal items, pieces of clothing, or other evidence. In recent years, the only person to have gone missing without a trace in the area was Andrea Lohajian. Consequently, most people immediately assumed the remains belonged to her. Andrea's parents described the outfit she wore on the day of her disappearance, including new black platform shoes and jeans purchased that day. However, none of these clothing items were discovered in the shed, which implies that the perpetrators likely got rid of them. It was also possible that Andrea's clothes were torn off shortly before her death, perhaps during an attempted assault. The remains were only identified as Andrea's after a thorough forensic examination, including an analysis of dental records. This allowed Andrea's family to learn the truth about her fate and give her a proper burial. However, it also sparked concerns about how thorough the initial searches were, since her body was found in an area that had already been searched before. A review of the search operation reports showed that investigators had examined the area, including an abandoned shed filled with debris, but they didn't find anything unusual at the time. It is possible that the body was hidden there later, but there is no evidence to confirm this. The investigation initially concentrated on the accounts of witnesses who claimed to have seen Andrea in the company of two teenagers, Robin and David, aged 13 to 14, just before her disappearance. Andrea's vanishing after being seen with Robin and David had seemed suspicious. The boys were questioned again and repeated that they had seen Andrea on the night she disappeared, but had only greeted her and had no involvement in her disappearance. Despite the lack of evidence, but the investigation still points to their involvement in Andrea's disappearance. It seemed unlikely that such young boys could be responsible for her murder, but their involvement couldn't be ruled out entirely. Further investigation revealed that the boys had a connection to the location where Andrea's remains were found. Witnesses had seen Robin and David near the shed on several occasions, and it was discovered that they had access to the inside of the abandoned building. Additionally, eyewitnesses reported seeing the boys at the entrance of the shed on the evening Andrea went missing, raising more questions and increasing suspicions about Robin and David's involvement in the crime. The investigation into the involvement of Robin and David in Andrea's disappearance was dropped due to insufficient evidence and their young age. At the time, detectives didn't think it was plausible for schoolboys to be involved in the crime. The search for Andrea continued. But authorities, media, and her family failed to uncover any valuable information. The case hit a dead end, and it was eventually shelved as unsolved. Without direct evidence pointing to a killer, detectives stopped their search. It wasn't until 2012, when new leadership took over the regional police department, that the case was reopened. Although new evidence and leads were discovered, there still wasn't enough proof to charge anyone. At this point, detectives didn't have a prime suspect. In May 2016, the case took a major turn when David, a 37-year-old man, died in Berlin from a serious pancreatic disease caused by years of drug addiction and unsettled lifestyle. He was one of the teenagers who had last seen Andrea alive. During a train trip, David suffered a fatal internal hemorrhage, and his death certificate listed natural causes, despite his extensive criminal history. Following David's death, a witness came forward to the authorities, claiming to have information that could solve Andrea's murder case. David's mother was a witness, but she concealed the disturbing truth about her son's involvement in the case. She revealed that on the evening of the murder in 1993, David, then 14, and his 13-year-old friend Robin encountered Andrea while walking on the same path. The two boys, drawn to Andrea's fashionable clothing, decided to attack and rob her. When Andrea recognized them in the darkness, fearing they would be exposed, Robin and David brutally killed her. The investigators were shocked by a sudden turn of events. They had previously suspected Robin and David of a crime, but lacked evidence to prosecute them. The boys' involvement was also questionable due to their young age. Until then, the boys, Robin and David, had gotten into only minor scrapes with the law and had managed to avoid punishment due to their youth. No one suspected that this lack of punishment would embolden them to commit more serious crimes. Years later, 36-year-old Robin was brought in for questioning. His former accomplice, David, had since passed away, so the police had to rely on Robin's testimony. Robin confessed to everything, including the gruesome details of the crime. He asked to speak with his family first, to confess to them, before providing a final statement to the investigators. The detectives agreed to give Robin 48 hours to meet with his family, appreciating his willingness to cooperate. However, they had no idea that Robin had already planned his next move. When he returned to his apartment, his wife was temporarily away. Robin left a note for his wife and a message for the police, detailing his involvement in the attack on Andrea Lohajian. Then, he disappeared without a trace. 2 days later, Robin was declared missing after he failed to show up. On November 4, 2016, a hunter discovered his body in the mountains. Robin's mutilated body was found at the bottom of a deep ravine. It appeared that Robin had taken his own life, so unable to cope with the guilt he committed in his youth. In his final note, Robin described the horrific details of the crime. Robin never knew why David started the attack, as David never shared his reasons with him. Despite this, Robin was able to recall the rest of what happened during the incident. According to Robin, they had no prior connection to the victim, Andrea Lohajian. When Andrea was walking along a small road near a club, she met Robin and David. The attack was a sudden and spontaneous act of aggression. Andrea probably chose that route to get to the party quickly and save time. When Robin thought back to the encounter, he remembered exchanging friendly greetings with Andrea alongside his friend David. Initially, Robin intended to continue his journey home, but his plans changed unexpectedly. David suddenly and aggressively attacked Andrea, catching both her and Robin off guard. After the assault, Robin and David concealed Andrea's body in a nearby outbuilding adjacent to the youth center. They covered the body with construction materials and then left the area. According to Robin's account, there was no apparent motive for the attack, such as theft or personal gain. The act seemed to be driven by a senseless and extreme aggression. Robin and David both had encounters with drug dealers while they were in school. Additionally, they were both under the influence of drugs on the night the incident occurred. Peter Lemon, the head of the youth center that Andrea was planning to visit, had fond memories of her. He described Andrea as a well-behaved guest who did not drink alcohol and mainly came to the center to play billiards and socialize with friends. Peter was deeply shocked by the violence against Andrea and provided full cooperation to the authorities investigating the incident. Peter had also been told about Robin and David. They often seen loitering near a shed a short distance from the club. There were numerous negative rumors going around about these boys, but Peter couldn't bring himself to believe that such young people were capable of committing such severe offenses. However, it turned out that these very juveniles had been roaming freely. For 20 years, Andrea's disappearance remained unsolved, despite a written confession from Robin and witness testimonies placing Robin and David near the scene of the crime. The investigation lacked direct evidence against the suspects, with no DNA or fingerprints found. Detectives carefully analyzed every word from Robin, including their social media posts and phone contents. The investigators were looking for clues that might suggest the suspects discussed or admitted to the crime. Shortly before his death, David's online accounts revealed ominous posts that seemed to hint at his involvement in Andrea's disappearance. But these leads were considered secondary evidence. It is presumed that David knew the investigation had reopened and was consumed by guilt. Although he did not intend to surrender to authorities, but his life had spiraled downward due to his struggle with drug addiction. David's mother believed her son's death was a sign from fate. She had been afraid to turn him in to the police, and David and his friend Robin were hesitant to share information about their past due to fear of revenge from people they used to associate with. This fear was legitimate considering David had a record of past violent behavior and convictions for drug crimes. Despite accumulating indirect evidence, one aspect of the case to horrify detectives: how could two ordinary 13 and 14 years old boys commit such a heinous crime against Andrea? As a result, Andrea's relatives and the investigators began to suspect that a third person, an adult, might have been involved in the crime, guiding Robin and David. The investigation revealed that Andrea's death was caused by a severe head injury from a blunt object. The severity of the injury suggests it would have taken considerable physical strength to inflict it. The detectives questioned whether Robin and David could overpower an older girl and inflict such an injury. This led them to consider the possibility of an adult accomplice, which was supported by other evidence. A new suspect emerged, a man associated with Robin and David's social circle, who was significantly older. However, his name was not disclosed. Robin's testimonies and pre-death note did not mention a third accomplice, and David's mother denied the possibility. Despite this, some witness statements suggested an adult was involved. Specifically, several witnesses reported seeing a truck driver around the same age as the suspect near the shed around the time of Andrea's disappearance. Investigators were able to identify this individual and connect him to the case. In reality, Andrea and her killers, Robin and David, attended the same school. However, due to their age difference, they didn't have classes, participate in the same activities, or have common friends. They may have crossed paths in the hallways or cafeteria. Andrea may have had prior conflicts with Robin and David that intensified their dislike for her. Robin and David both came from difficult and unstable families, which led them to start using alcohol and drugs at a young age as a way to cope. On the night of the incident, they may have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs, which could have made them more aggressive. What's more remarkable is that Andrea's remains were found on a plot of land owned by a relative of one of the killers, her ex-boyfriend's grandfather. Some people believe that this resemblance cannot be a coincidence, and they suspect the involvement of her ex-boyfriend in the case. The public was shocked and outraged when it was discovered that these very teenagers were involved in the murder. The revelation led to widespread criticism, mainly because detectives had initially dismissed the case in the 1990s, citing the suspect's youth as the reason. If detectives had investigated these teenagers as suspects at the time of the crimes, it is likely that the victims' bodies would have been discovered much sooner. An earlier investigation could have helped authorities bring the killers to justice. The autopsy results showed that Andrea had a fractured skull, but the object used to inflict the injury could not be identified. The investigation relied only on a few small bones of Andrea. All that remained of the skeleton had decomposed. The investigation into the juvenile criminals relied heavily on testimonies from David's mother and notes from Robin, as no direct physical evidence was available. One of the key concerns for detectives after reopening the case was whether David and Robin had committed any new crimes during the 20-plus years they were free. While it was unlikely, the detectives could not rule out this possibility. They spoke to local residents. However, the detectives did find a history of minor crimes committed by David and Robin. Further investigation into these incidents uncovered disturbing secrets. As detectives looked into Robin's potential involvement in a recent serious crime, they discovered a disturbing incident. In January 2014, a French student named Louise went missing after meeting with friends at the university hospital. Louise had arranged to meet her friends over the phone just before leaving home, but she never arrived. When Louise's friends tried calling her, her phone went unanswered. Assuming Louise had urgent matters to attend to, her friends went home, but when Louise didn't show up for work the next day without explanation, her friends became concerned, as this was unusual for her. Louise was a responsible person, but one evening her phone was unreachable, and her whereabouts were unknown. Later, Louise's body was later discovered, and the primary suspect in her murder was identified as Robin, a juvenile who had previously been linked to the murder of Andrea and had subsequently taken his own life. What made the situation even more disturbing was that Louise personally knew Robin, but she had no idea about his dark past. As a result, she became his second victim. Despite the suspicions, proving Robin's involvement in Louise's murder was difficult due to a lack of direct evidence. The case remains unsolved, and many have criticized police for dropping the investigation into Robin and David, suspects in Andrea's 1993 murder, citing the suspect's young age at the time. The carelessness shown in handling the case allowed criminals to commit new crimes with a high likelihood. Robin's past crimes were neglected, and his case was left unsolved, ultimately leading to the death of Louise. Years earlier, Andrea's body was left to decompose, and her case was also neglected. The Andrea family feels that the young perpetrators didn't get the punishment they deserved for their crimes. Even though the killers are dead, but they were still able to live freely for a time and experience the simple joys of life. The motives behind Andrea's murder, like many other details of the case, remain unknown due to a lack of evidence. This case shows that the idea that young people are not capable of carrying out serious crimes is incorrect. Although the truth will eventually come to light, it may be too late to deliver justice. Andrea's youth, full of promise and dreams for the future, was tragically taken. The case of Lin family. Min Lin and Yun Lin's romance began in the late 1980s when they met at an Australian university. They both came from China and had moved to Australia to further their studies. Min had completed her bachelor's degree and was doing an internship, while Yun participated in a student exchange program. They met each other after meeting accidentally in the university hallway. After graduating, they got married and settled in North Epping, Sydney, where their love continued to grow into a strong, close-knit family. Min and Yun had their first child, Brenda Lin, in August 1994. She was mostly known as Brenda. Their son, Henry, was born in 1997, and their youngest child, Terry, was born in 2000. At the start of the 2000s, Min and Yun decided to start a business, opening a small newsroom. Through their hard work, it became a successful news agency with a publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lin family's business success had brought them economic security. A spacious house, a luxury car, and good education for their children. Min had handled business affairs, while Yun had focused on taking care of their home and children. Neighbors had respected the Lin family for their hard work and kindness. As parents, Min and Yun had been appreciated for their care and love for their children. They had never quarreled, their children had been very obedient and close-knit. Brenda, the eldest daughter, had stood out for her beauty, good academic performance, and kindness towards animals. Henry and Terry, two sons, had been both active and loved sports, especially soccer. As the Lin family had settled into life in Australia and their assets had increased, they had begun bringing relatives from China to live with them. In the early 2000s, Min's parents had been the first to move to North Epping and had helped with childcare. A few years later, Yun's parents also moved to Sydney suburb, with Min and Yun buying them a small house. Yun's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lin family, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lin family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. In late 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy, and her husband, Robert, moved to Australia in search of better opportunities. They had visited before and briefly lived in Melbourne, but had returned to China. This time, they were determined to settle in Australia for good. Robert was a former successful ear, nose, and throat doctor in China, decided to try his hand at entrepreneurship. He and his wife invested all their savings in a restaurant in Sydney, but the business struggled and eventually closed. Robert's subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed due to his lack of business skills and financial management experience. Lin's family had a habit of meeting every Friday night. Their last family gathering took place on July 17, 2009, at Kathy and Min's parents' home. The next morning, July 18th, the Lin family's store had not been open, making longtime customers feel surprised and confused. This sudden closure had raised their concerns. One of them tried to contact Min multiple times but was unsuccessful, so they called Min's sister Kathy to see if she knew what was going on. Kathy was surprised and worried because her brother never closed the shop without making arrangements first. Kathy tried to call Min and Yun, but they didn't answer. She also tried calling their home phone, but no one picked up. Kathy and her husband Robert were worried, so they decided to visit Min's house to make sure everything was okay. They arrived around 9 a.m. and saw the family car. They went to the house. The front door was unlocked, but there was no sign of Min or his family inside. Kathy went upstairs. When she opened the bedroom door, she was shocked by what she saw. The room was covered in blood, including the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. Yum Lin's body was on the floor near the bed, and she had been severely mutilated. Kathy screamed and stumbled backward, was shocked by the gruesome scene. In the room next to where Irene slept, a terrible scene took place. Irene lay motionless on the bed, her face beaten and bruised. The bedrooms of Henry, 12, and Terry, 9, also revealed horrifying scenes. Both were brutally beaten to death. Their bodies were found in separate corners of the room. Min Lin's body was found in his bedroom, covered with a blanket soaked in blood. He was killed in the same way as his family. It seems he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and then the two boys. Kathy immediately contacted emergency services. After Kathy's urgent call, Robert left to fetch the Lin's parents, who lived about 10 kilometers from the crime scene. Police and paramedics arrived quickly, encountering what they described as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had witnessed. Tragically, the Lin family members were all killed. Each person died from multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt object similar to a hammer. However, the crime weapon was not found at the scene. The initial examination of the crime scene did not reveal any important clues. The killer did not leave the murder weapon behind, and they did not take any valuables or money. This suggests that the main goal was to kill the Lin family, not to steal from them. At first, investigators thought there might be multiple attackers because it seemed unlikely that one person could overpower so many people. However, evidence showed that the children were awake during the attack and tried to escape. There were blood stains and splatters throughout the house. Oddly, all adult victims had head injuries and showed signs of strangulation. Investigators found identical bloody shoe prints in each room with a tread pattern. Although they could not identify the shoe brand, they determined the shoe size. No fingerprints were found, suggesting the killers wore gloves. Initially, the police had no leads or theories about the perpetrator's identity. Friends and neighbors of the Lin family all said that the family had no known enemies, making the motive for the brutal massacre unclear. The attack occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. Brenda Lin, the eldest child and now sole survivor of the Lin family, was attending school in New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She learned about the incident through social media and initially did not believe it was related to her family, but the truth devastated her. Brenda soon received a call from her Aunt Kathy, who tearfully confirmed the devastating news. Brenda was immediately flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert met her at the airport. She then moved in with them, as her family's home was closed off as a crime scene. The following day, Brenda was taken to the police station, overcome with grief, to be questioned. However, she had no new information to share, stressing that her family had no enemies and hadn't noticed anything unusual before her trip. After her family's passing, Brenda inherited a significant fortune, including property and the family business. Since she was still a minor and in school, her guardians, Kathy and Robert, took on the responsibility of managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her caregivers. Robert even threatened to take legal action if the grandparents sought custody, claiming they were too old to care for a teenager. The matter was eventually resolved, with Brenda remaining in the care of her aunt and uncle. The Lynn's shop and publishing business reopened under new management after a temporary closure. However, Brenda had not yet taken over the business operations. Robert began reviewing the family's financial records, including bank accounts, savings, and real estate. Beside that, experts thoroughly investigated the crime scene, documenting every detail, but no concrete leads were found. They believed the killer acted alone and entered the house quietly, possibly through and with a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinctive tread pattern and likely used a hammer as the lethal weapon, which was never found. The killer wore gloves, leaving no fingerprints or foreign DNA behind. One notable detail was the presence of blood stains on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the killings occurred, indicating the killer's bloodied gloves had touched them. However, there were no blood stains on Brenda's room doorknob, suggesting the killer knew she was not present. The Lynn family tragedy received extensive media coverage. However, with no concrete evidence or suspects, numerous implausible theories surfaced. Speculation about the family's supposed vast wealth leading to their murder. As the investigation had stalled, no suspects had emerged for the probe. The theory of a robbery had eventually been abandoned because the killer had left money and valuables intact, suggesting the sole motive had been to kill family members. Furthermore, the fact that the house had lost power on the night of the murder suggested that the murderer had been someone who was familiar with the location of the electrical panel. The attacker's ability to control the house in darkness showed that he had prior knowledge of the house's layout. When reviewing the case, an investigator replayed Kathy's emergency call looking for missed clues. An important hint was detected in the recording. The recording captured Kathy's frantic attempts to explain the situation, her words interrupted by crying and sobbing. At the end of the call, Kathy mentioned her husband's name and talked to him in Cantonese. This piqued the investigators' interest, causing them to translate her words. The translation revealed that Kathy was pleading with Robert not to leave Kathy home alone. This was significant since Robert had left Kathy at the scene of the crime to pick up her parents, despite the potential danger. With 5 people brutally murdered and the killer possibly still inside, Robert's calm aroused suspicion, as if he already knew for certain that Kathy was safe. The police finally identified Robert as the main suspect. A crucial discovery was that Robert had a key to Min's house, which had been given to Robert shortly before the tragedy. However, Robert never mentioned this during questioning, and his wife Kathy was unaware that Min had given him the key. It was Brenda who unintentionally revealed this important information to investigators. Further investigation showed that Robert's claim of being a successful ear, nose, and throat doctor was false. Although he had a medical degree, he had never had a stable job in the field. There were rumors that he had fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish a successful career and wasted his remaining savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Keeping, he became idle, relying on his wife's income. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lynn family's estate. His first move was to force Yun's parents out of their home, which Min had bought for them. Although the house remained in Min's name, Min and Kathy's parents were still allowed to stay in their own home that was also purchased for them. Based on this information, investigators suspected he had a long-standing plot to usurp Min family property, money, and profitable business. However, the police could not arrest Robert yet due to a lack of concrete evidence. Through a combination of interrogation, surveillance, and other methods, the investigation team was granted permission to install hidden cameras in the Robert household. They hoped to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unexpected revelation from Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned Robert's preference for a specific brand of shoes. A few years ago, Robert bought 2 pairs of limited edition sneakers that he really liked. He had worn out one pair and thrown it away, but kept the other pair at home. What's important to note is that Robert's shoe size, 9.5, matched the size of the shoes worn by the killers. The crucial evidence was caught on a hidden camera, which showed Robert deliberately destroying the box that held the remaining pair of shoes. A search warrant was issued for Robert's home. During the search, police found a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers with the same pattern as the pattern collected at the crime scene. In the garage, they discovered a small bloodstain, which was later confirmed by a forensic examiner to be a bloodstain containing DNA from all 5 victims of the Lin family, linking it to the crime scene. In May 2011, 2 years after the tragedy, Robert was officially arrested. He denied involvement, claiming the blood stains in his garage appeared after returning from Lin's house following the tragedy. He also downplayed the importance of the sneakers, saying they were new and he threw away the old shoes. While in prison awaiting trial, Robert shared a cell with a number of informants whom the police had arranged. During a conversation, he confessed to carefully planning the crime and covering his tracks. He bought the weapon in a store without surveillance cameras and gave his wife tea so she wouldn't wake up while he was committing the crime. He removed the hammer, shoes, gloves, and clothes so police would never find them. At trial, Robert denied everything. The only evidence against him is what the informant said and some indirectly clues. The jury failed to find Robert guilty and he was released on bail in December 2015. But when the trial resumed in June 2016, another informant said Robert had confessed to being haunted by Brenda since she was 13 years old. Brenda was questioned again and tearfully said Robert forced her to have sex when she first moved in. She kept silent about the abuse for years because she was afraid of what Robert might do. With this new information and other evidence, Robert was officially convicted of all charges. He was given 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 1 for each murder. All of his appeals were rejected. The case of Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni. This story began in 2016 in the Argentine city of Mendoza. On January 10th, 2 young women, 21-year-old Marina Menegazzo and 22-year-old Maria Jose Coni, embarked on a highly anticipated trip. Unfortunately, their journey ultimately led to one of the most publicized investigations in Latin America over the past decade. At the time, Maria Jose was a 22-year-old economics student at the National University of Cuyo, while Marina was a 21-year-old speech therapy student at the Aconcagua University. Both women volunteered for an organization that assisted homeless individuals. According to friends and acquaintances, they were 2 bright and cheerful young women who were extremely close to their families. Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni embarked on a trip with 2 friends, but the group eventually parted ways. They girls continued their journey, which began on January 10th. Their route can be tracked through Maria Jose Coni's Instagram posts. On January 13th, they were in Cusco, Peru, an ancient city that was once the capital of the Inca Empire. The next day, January 14th, another photo was posted, also taken in Cusco. A subsequent image was published on January 15th, showing they on a railway bridge near the Machu Picchu hydroelectric power plant. Machu Picchu is a famous ancient Inca city, often referred to as the City Above the Clouds, and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Maria Jose Coni and Marina Menegazzo had about 10 days of vacation left and were in no rush to return home. They decided to revisit Montañita, the town in Ecuador where their trip had begun. On February 22nd, Maria Jose Coni posted a photo of herself with Marina Menegazzo on Instagram, which would be her last post. On the same day, they contacted their families in Argentina to let them know they would be returning soon. They planned to take a bus from Ecuador to Lima, Peru, where they would spend the night at a friend's house. From Lima, they would fly to Santiago, Chile on February 25th, and then take a bus to their hometown of Mendoza, Argentina. They informed their relatives that they would be unreachable by phone for a few days due to poor signal reception. However, when their relatives tried to contact them, they were unable to get in touch. As the days passed, there was no activity on Maria Jose Coney and Marina Manazzo's social media accounts, causing their relatives to become increasingly worried. Marina Manazzo's sister took to social media to raise awareness about their disappearance. She posted a photo of they girls with a message stating that they had gone missing on Monday, the 22nd, in Montevideo, Ecuador, and asked people to share the information. The families were eager to know if they had left the country and boarded a flight, but their attempts to contact the airline were met with no response. The family of Maria Jose Coney and Marina Manazzo tried to get information from they were supposed to stay with before leaving, but they claimed they never showed up. The family then reported they missing to the emergency services in Ecuador and also contacted the Argentine consulate for assistance. The Argentine consulate got involved on February 27th and sent their fingerprints to Ecuador. This was done because a few days earlier, on February 25th, an unidentified woman's body was found in Montevideo and taken to Guayaquil. The authorities compared the fingerprints from Argentina with those of the unidentified body and confirmed that the body was that of Maria Jose Coney. On Saturday, February 27th, police investigated the area where Maria Jose Coney's body was discovered and found the body of Marina Manazzo just 43 yards away. Like Marina Manazzo's body, Maria Jose Coney's was also wrapped in a plastic bag and duct tape. According to the Ecuadorian police, the killer attempted to conceal Marina Manazzo's body by placing an object on top of it, which initially prevented its discovery. During the autopsy, the medical expert determined that Maria Jose Coney's death was caused by severe blunt force trauma to the head. Her injuries also included a broken leg, a broken toe, and what authorities described as genital injuries. Additionally, markings on her wrist suggested that she had been restrained. Marina Manazzo died from 6 stab wounds to the neck and had similar wrist markings, indicating that she had also been tied up. Their deaths occurred on February 23rd. Toxicology tests revealed that their blood contained a high amount of a psychiatric medication. Based on the circumstances of their deaths, police believed that they had not taken the medication voluntarily and may not have even known they had ingested it. It is likely that someone had mixed the medication into their food or drinks without their knowledge. A breakthrough in the case came just 24 hours after the discovery of the second body. The President and Interior Minister of Ecuador announced that the police had made an arrest, sparking mixed emotions among the victims' families. Alberto Segundo Mina Pon, 33, and Aurelio Eduardo Rodriguez, 39, were taken into custody and quickly confessed to the crime, revealing the events that had transpired. Physical evidence found at the home of one of the suspects, Mina Pon, included bloodstains. The police also recovered Marina's phone, backpack, and other belongings near the house. The rapid arrest and immediate confession of they men were met with skepticism by those following the case, leaving many with unanswered questions. Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, Jose Serrano, claimed that they checked out of their hotel room on February 22nd at 2 p.m. According to the men's story, they had their money stolen at the hotel, prompting them to hitchhike to Lima. However, the hotel owner disputed this claim, stating that there was no evidence of theft. Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coney's families found this explanation hard to believe, particularly since they had credit cards that they could have used if they encountered financial difficulties. The lack of activity on the credit cards suggested that either someone stole both the cash and cards or that the men's story was not true. Moreover, they could have accessed the funds in their account without needing the physical card, but they didn't use the money to book travel or accommodations online. According to Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones entered a bar and requested 2 glasses of water because they were thirsty and had no money. The bar owner corroborated this account, stating that she provided them with water due to their financial situation. However, it remains unclear whether that money was actually stolen. The minister continued by referencing the testimony of the suspects, who had already confessed to their guilt. One of the suspects, Pon, stated that around 8 p.m. on that day, Rodriguez informed him about 2 Argentinian girls in a bar. Pon and Rodriguez approached they and started a conversation, during which Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones explained that they were hitchhiking to Lima because they lacked the funds for a bus ticket. This version of events raises several questions. They had purchased plane tickets from Lima to Santiago, Chile, which is over 1,000 miles away. It seems illogical that they would try to save money by hitchhiking and risk missing their flight, which was scheduled for February 25th. This conversation with Pon allegedly took place on the evening of February 22nd, making their decision even more puzzling. However, local police found witnesses who corroborated this unusual story. Since Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones had no money for a hotel or hostel and needed a place to stay for the night, Pon offered to let them stay at his house. They accepted his offer. A taxi driver was found who confirmed that he drove Marina Manazzo, Maria Jose Cones, and Pon to Pon's home. This picture is of the house where Pon resided. After that, Pon returned to the bar with Rodriguez, as reported by Ecuadorian authorities, and continued drinking. Meanwhile, Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones were left alone in the house. The intoxicated men returned home around 2:30 a.m., but Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones were no longer there. The police investigation revealed that Marina Manazzo va Maria Jose Cones had visited a nearby store to purchase soda before returning to the house. A store cashier confirmed this, indicating that Marina Manazzo va Maria Jose Cones still had some money on them. According to Pon's account, when they returned to the house, he stayed in one room with Maria Jose Cones, while Rodriguez was in another room with Marina Manazzo. Pon admitted that he attempted to persuade Maria Jose Cones into a romantic encounter, but she resisted and tried to leave. In a fit of rage, Pon grabbed a stick and struck Maria Jose Cones on the head, killing her instantly. At the same time, he heard a scream coming from the other room. Upon entering the room, he found that Rodriguez had also taken Marina Manazzo's life. Rodriguez immediately fled the scene, leaving Pon to contemplate how to dispose of the bodies. Pon attempted to erase all evidence from the house by wrapping the bodies in plastic bags and duct tape. In the afternoon, he borrowed a cart from an acquaintance and transported the bodies to a wasteland near the ocean shore, approximately 440 yards from his home. It is essential to note that this account is the official version provided by the Ecuadorian authorities. However, this narrative leaves several questions unanswered, including the origin of the marks on her wrists and the presence of a potent drug in the blood of both girls, as revealed by toxicological analysis. Her family questioned the Ecuadorian authorities' account due to numerous inconsistencies in the case. They suspected a possible connection to human trafficking and believed the authorities might be protecting someone. The family's doubts were fueled by several factors. They had run out of money but did not use their credit cards, suggesting that they may have been coerced or deceived. Additionally, it was reported that they were under the influence of drugs, which raised suspicions about their supposed activities. Notably, the only people who claimed to have seen Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Cones on the day of their disappearance were a select few who corroborated the authorities' version, including the owner of the bar, a taxi driver, and a cashier who allegedly sold soda to one of they. Furthermore, the town's relatively small population of 5,000 residents made it surprising that no one else came forward as a witness. The families of the victims were confused by several aspects of the case. They couldn't understand why the bodies were found 2 days apart, despite being only 43 yards away from each other. It also seemed strange that Marina Manatsova Maria Jose Coni had sought help from Pon and Rodriguez, rather than approaching one of the many Argentine tourists in the area. The brother of one of the victims reported seeing used syringes on the floor when he was taken to the crime scene by the Ecuadorian police. However, when he asked about them, the syringes mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, the syringes were not visible in crime scene photos, and the experts who examined the area denied their existence. The family suspected that Pon and Rodriguez were involved in something more sinister, such as human trafficking, and that they were being used as a cover. The authorities responded by scheduling a second autopsy and a new toxicological examination. Additionally, it was discovered that both defendants had repeatedly changed their story about the events surrounding Marina Manatso and Maria Jose Coni deaths. According to one version, Pon denied involvement in the crime and instead claimed that the perpetrator was a Venezuelan illegal substance dealer known as El Chamo, who lived in the area. However, when questioned by the police, El Chamo denied any involvement and offered to take a polygraph test or provide a DNA sample to prove his innocence. The crime scene yielded several DNA samples, including those from Pon and the deceased girls, as well as some unidentified samples. Further testing revealed that the unidentified samples did not match Rodriguez, who was suspected of being Pon's accomplice, nor El Chamo, who was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. A second autopsy, conducted by Argentine experts, revealed that the girls were in a state of vulnerability and unable to defend themselves before their deaths. The autopsy also confirmed that they were subjected to forced intimacy before being killed. The autopsy revealed additional details, including that Maria Jose Coni had bruises and scratches only on one side of her body, suggesting she may have been ejected from a moving vehicle. Furthermore, a new toxicological analysis confirmed that both girls had been given a potent psychiatric medication that can impair a person's willpower. A disturbing reaction swept across Latin America following the incident. Unfortunately, the public's response often blamed the victims, and in this case, they were held responsible for their own deaths. Not only were they criticized by ordinary internet users, but also by well-known public figures. During the same time, Berlin hosted a tourism fair where Rira gave an interview to a German news agency. Her comments were alarming, as she stated that the deaths were inevitable, given the way they traveled. She also revealed that she had never visited Montanita, a popular tourist destination, because it didn't match her social status. These comments were essentially victim blaming at the state level, which is a sad and concerning fact. Following an interview with Riva Dera, the Ecuadorian government issued an apology to the families of Marina Manatso and Maria Jose Coni, and one woman was fired. Among those heavily criticized was Argentine psychiatrist Hugo Narton, who described they as favorable victims and implied that they provoked others to commit crimes. However, after intense backlash, Dr. Narton claimed he had been misunderstood and emphasized that he never intended to excuse or absolve criminals of their responsibilities. A Paraguayan student, Guadalupe Aosta, wrote a Facebook post in response to online comments that blamed Marina Manatso and Maria Jose Coni for their tragic fate. The post went viral, receiving over 700,000 reposts in the first week. It began with the haunting words, "Yesterday, I was killed." The post went on to describe the violent events. "I refused to be touched, and they smashed my skull open with a stick, leaving me broken. They put me in a black plastic bag, sealed with duct tape, and threw me on the beach, where I was later found a few hours later. The aftermath of my death was more devastating than the act itself. When my body was found, no one bothered to investigate who had taken my life. Instead, I was bombarded with irrelevant and insensitive questions. What was I wearing? Why was I alone? Why did I, a woman, dare to travel by myself? I was in a high-risk area, so what did I expect? The authorities even had the audacity to suggest to my parents that I must have done something wrong, that I must have broken some rule. In death, I realized that I was not considered equal to a man. My demise was somehow my fault, and that's the narrative that would be perpetuated. But if the headlines had read, "Two young men found dead," the public would have been outraged, demanding justice and severe punishment for the perpetrators. The response would have been vastly different if I were a man. I'm speaking out for myself and for all the women who have been silenced, marginalized, and oppressed. I'm speaking out for every woman who has had her dreams crushed and her life destroyed. I urge you to raise your voice, to fight for justice and equality. I'll be with you in spirit, and I promise that one day, there will be so many of us standing together that our voices cannot be silenced. The trial started on August 8, 2016, but was marred by several setbacks. The prosecutor changed 3 times, causing significant delays in the process. Despite these challenges, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of evidence, including witness statements and over 200 physical items collected from the crime scene. The police had found some of the victim's personal belongings, biological fluids, and phones at the house where the crime took place and in the surrounding area. During the trial, Pon maintained his innocence, claiming that his earlier confession was made under police pressure. This statement only reinforced the suspicions of the victims' families that the Ecuadorian authorities were withholding information. Meanwhile, Rodriguez altered his testimony, suggesting that Colombian dealers of illicit substances were involved in 8 deaths. In the trial's first week, the prosecutor revealed that he suspected additional individuals were involved in the case. This suspicion was based on the discovery of 3 more male DNA samples at the crime scene, in addition to the DNA of Rodriguez and Pon. Ultimately, the court found both Pon and Rodriguez guilty, sentencing them to 40 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under Ecuadorian law. In November 2016, Ecuadorian authorities arrested José Luis Pérez Castro, a 34-year-old man, after finding his DNA at the crime scene. Castro's defense team claimed that he had lived in the house a few weeks prior to the incident and that his DNA was present due to a dental infection. They alleged that he had spat blood onto the wall as a result of this infection. However, the defense's explanation for the presence of Castro's DNA on the victims' bodies was that he must have touched an object or piece of furniture that the police had also handled, thereby transferring his DNA. This argument began to fall apart when a dentist testified in court. It was revealed that Castro had contacted the dentist 2 weeks after the bodies of Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coney were discovered, asking for a note to confirm his alleged dental infection. The dentist refused to provide the note, as he found no evidence of any health issues during his examination of Castro. A man was ejected from a dentist's office after seeking a medical certificate. The dentist refused to issue one, explaining that there needed to be an underlying medical condition causing pain, which he didn't observe. This denial dismantled his defense. Meanwhile, while awaiting trial, Castro broke prison rules by posting on social media about his situation. In a statement, he expressed confidence that God would ultimately prove his innocence. Despite his persistent claims of innocence, Castro was ultimately found guilty and received a 40-year prison sentence, just like 2 others, Alberto Pon and Eduardo Rodriguez. The case of Sony Millbrook. Sony Millbrook was born in Memphis, Tennessee, USA, on February 15, 1981. She grew up in a close-knit family with 2 sisters, 3 brothers, and a large extended family, which allowed her to form a strong bond with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. In 1998, at the age of 17, Sony became a popular student at her high school. The same year, she met Lelth Moody, a man in his 20s, and began a romantic relationship with him. Unfortunately, the relationship turned out to be abusive, and Elth's violent behavior left visible marks on Sony's body. Despite this, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after Elth. A year later, In 1999, Soni's mother noticed a bruise on her chest. Soni confessed that the bruise was caused by her friend Leith, who was controlling and often tried to isolate her from her friends and family. In the same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. However, her new home was soon vandalized, with furniture slashed, clothes missing, the television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. On the mirror, someone had written, "Kiki loves you" in red nail polish, with Kiki being Leith's nickname. On October 31st, 2000, Soni, her cousin Pamela, and Leith went to a bar called Mirage. While they were there, Leith slapped Soni and threw a drink in her face. Soni and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car, where Soni was visibly shaken and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Leith arrived. Once home, Soni locked and chained the door. An hour later, Leith showed up, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela finally got Leith to leave by threatening to call the police. After Soni calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela got a call saying that Soni was in the hospital. Somehow, Leith had managed to get into the house, and when Soni tried to end the relationship, he violently retaliated. He tore her clothes, beat her on the head, face, chest, arms, and thighs, leaving her with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even temporarily losing consciousness after being choked until she passed out by Leith Moody. Not long after, Soni discovered Leith Moody's birth control pills in her apartment, and he assaulted her again. By late 2008, when Soni was 27, she was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time, so when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. One day, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised, and she didn't want the children to see her like that. The director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy, and Soni confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road. Leith Moody's violence wasn't limited to Soni and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm, despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. On October 6, 2008, the situation between Soni and her boyfriend Leith reached a crisis point. After failing to show up at the academy, Soni sent a distressing text message to her boss at 5 p.m., stating that Leith was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She provided her address, prompting her boss to alert the police. 2 officers responded to the call and arrived at the residence. When they knocked on the door, it was locked from the inside, and there was no response. The fire department was called to break down the door, and upon entering the apartment, the officers saw Leith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Soni stood in the hallway, visibly distraught and unable to speak. Her 4 children were with her, creating a heart-wrenching scene. Her face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. Once she calmed down, Soni recounted the events that had unfolded. She and Leith had started arguing, and he had refused to let her leave the house. Soni explained that they had not answered the door earlier because Leith had forbidden her or the children from approaching it or the windows. He had even hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Soni detailed the physical and verbal abuse she had suffered at Leith's hands, including being choked with a baby blanket until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Leith had threatened to suffocate her again, vowing to kill her next time. Although the officers searched the area, they were unable to find Leith. Soni and her children eventually left the house in her car. 3 days after the incident, Soni applied for a restraining order against Leith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she failed to attend the court hearing on October 23rd, which meant the protection order was never granted. 6 months later, on March 10th, 2009, Sony and Leith were still in contact. On that day, Leith was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated, with Leith slapping her, pulling her hair, and yelling death threats as she tried to escape. Sony managed to break free and ran out of the apartment, with Leith chasing after her. He didn't catch her, but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol, responding to the domestic disturbance, arrived just as Leith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, Sony, then 28 years old, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her fifth child was 9 weeks old and in fragile health, requiring her to stay home and care for him. In January, Sony and their children moved into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. On the very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff intervened, as they were disturbing other guests. Unfortunately, peace remained elusive, as their fights continued to disturb the neighbors and the management with excessive noise. On January 22nd, a hotel security guard witnessed Leith in a highly agitated state when he arrived at high speed in Sony's car. He began shouting at her while she stood on the second-floor balcony with their children. During the heated argument, Leith threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard intervened, telling Leith that he needed to keep the noise down and refrain from throwing objects, and that the argument should be continued inside their room. However, Leith responded by telling the guard to mind his own business, locked the car, and walked away, with the guard following him to a third-floor room that was not registered under anyone's name. When the guard asked Leith to hand over any hotel keys he had, Leith surprisingly produced keys to 3 different rooms, despite not being registered as a guest. The following day, Leith, Sony, and their children moved to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Leith to leave, which he did, but he soon returned. The confrontations persisted for a few more days until the same security guard, who had repeatedly warned them, finally asked Leith to vacate the property permanently. As Leith went to the parking lot, the receptionist attempted to calm him down, and the guard warned him not to return that night. Leith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony privately shared with Pamela that a lot was going on in her life, and that she was currently staying at a motel. She hinted that she had something important to confide in Pamela and promised to get in touch if she ended up leaving the motel or if her boyfriend did. The next day began like any other, with Sony taking her younger kids to daycare and dropping off her oldest at school around 11 a.m. However, things took a turn when the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window, to inform her that they needed to settle their bill or leave the hotel room. He returned several times that day, looking for a response. At around 2:30 p.m., Leith answered the door, telling the manager that his mother would be back soon with the money they owed. But when the hotel security guard checked room 222, he found it empty, with children's clothes, bags, and various items scattered all over the floor. One of the beds was neatly made, which seemed out of place given the state of the room. Later that day, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter from school, which was unusual. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but there was no answer. Growing worried, she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Convinced something was wrong, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger kids while she went to the school. They eventually contacted the police, who arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222, which was now vacant, to collect and label the personal belongings that the previous tenants had left behind, apparently to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothing and a large trash bag, which were both taken to the storage area. After emptying the room, it was thoroughly cleaned and readied for new guests. The following day, on January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into room 222. Upon moving in, the new tenants immediately noticed a strong, unpleasant odor in the room. They attempted to mask it by burning incense, but this effort was unsuccessful. During their search for the source of the smell, they discovered that the previous tenants had also tried to hide it, as evidenced by the scented tissues they found stuck in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was most pronounced when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to ask about Soni's whereabouts, as it was the last place she was seen. However, the officers did not search room 222. Leith was found on February 2nd at around 7 p.m. in Soni's car, which was parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for stealing the vehicle and held in police custody for 48 hours. During that time, he was questioned about Soni's disappearance. Leith said the last time he saw her was on January 26, when they met at 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot, went to the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. According to Leith, Soni let him take her car keys because she planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car. However, investigators discovered that Leith had actually been staying at a different hotel, making it unlikely that he spent nights in the car, especially considering the snow during that period. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Soni's name, along with several recent purchase receipts inside the car. On the same day, police examined the clothes that had been stored at the hotel, searching for DNA or other evidence, but they found nothing. This lack of progress added to their frustrations, and as a result, Leith had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Soni's disappearance. Meanwhile, Soni's cousin and her mother had the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Soni's belongings. Soni's cousin had a terrible premonition, but unfortunately, she did not find anything to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police went to Moody's uncle's house, where they found a DVD player that had been taken from the hotel room in Soni's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin, who told the police that Leith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, saying he wanted to watch a movie. Leith was seen driving a red car that day. Later, when the cousin asked Leith why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, Leith avoided the question. When asked about Soni, Leith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and quickly left the house. James and Rhonda Sargent asked to be moved from room 222 because of the constant bad smell. Since no other rooms were available, they had to move to a different hotel. However, even after the room was cleaned and the carpet was washed in early February, subsequent guests in room 222 still complained about the foul smell, which only slightly improved for a few days. Soni's family, especially her kids, were devastated by her disappearance. Their only hope was for her safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel where Soni was last seen. By then, her room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives didn't enter the room, but asked the staff if they had noticed anything unusual, and all said no. On February 7th, James and Rhonda, probably relatives or friends of Soni, returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times, including one night in room 222, which was the same room Soni had stayed in. They told the management that the room still smelled bad. In March, a deeper cleaning of room 222 was carried out, including the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. But to everyone's surprise, the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. The manager talked to the security guard about the issue, and during their conversation, they remembered that Soni had vanished at the end of January. The guard recalled the events from that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for signs of blood or cleaning products. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to come with him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men walked into the room to find that the manager had removed the mattress from one bed, leaving only the frame behind. The lower part of the bed frame had a built-in enclosure, which prevented the space underneath from being used as a storage area. However, when they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large empty space that could conceal anything. As they peered through the solid edges of the frame, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight, a decomposing body. They immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. Upon inspection, the bed frame was found to have marks all over it, with 2 broken wooden areas near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were discovered between the legs of the body, which was dressed in a shirt, but was naked from the waist down. The autopsy conducted by the forensic team revealed that the cause of death was strangulation using a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the victim's neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. According to the forensic examiner, it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA analysis matched Sony's genetic profile, which included female markers. Additionally, male genetic material was found on 5 parts of the cable. The main theory was that Sony was already dead when she was reported missing, and that Leith had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, suggesting premeditation. Leith was detained by the police shortly after, although not for the discovery of Sony's body. He was arrested on a separate charge of possessing a firearm, despite a prior felony conviction. Despite this, he was considered a person of interest at the time of his arrest, as he was the last person seen with Sony alive. Furthermore, he was found in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the detention facility in Mason on March 18th. The police have launched an internal investigation to find out why the case took such an unusual turn. They acknowledged that the family deserved answers and explained that despite their eagerness to solve the case, the officers had taken a wrong turn that led them away from the room. The police also stated that they had never dealt with a situation like this before, saying that the discovery was more astonishing than fiction and highlighted the tragedy of domestic violence. However, they regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented out multiple times since Sony's death, which made it difficult for them to collect evidence. Rhonda, one of the first tenants to occupy the room where Sony's body was found, expressed skepticism about the police explanation when she spoke to the media. She pointed out that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, she and her husband would have let them in. Rhonda argued that unlike her and her husband, the officers should have been able to recognize the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much sooner. Finally, the time arrived to bid a loving and dignified farewell to Sony. On March 24th, her funeral took place. Following her death, Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister and brother-in-law. By April 1st, they had begun the process of obtaining legal guardianship of the children. She acknowledged that while the children were the primary victims of the tragedy, the lives of all family members were severely disrupted. She vowed that although she couldn't bring her sister back, she was resolute in providing for Sony's children, ensuring they received the necessities like food, clothing, and toys, and keeping them together as a family unit. Sony had benefited from a social program that refilled her debit card for grocery purchases on a regular basis. Shortly before her disappearance, the card was replenished as part of her tax refund. The police were able to track the card's movements, which led them to Leith, who was found with the card. Their investigation showed that the card was used on February 1st, 4 days after Sony went missing, at a convenience store she regularly visited on the 1st of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. The police visited the store and asked the owner to share the footage from the 16 security cameras. The surveillance system had captured footage of a man wearing yellow clothing using Sony's card at 11:38 a.m. on February 1st. He bought a bottle of orange juice, withdrew some cash, and purchased a cigar. After making the purchases, the man returned to a car driven by another person. In February 2014, nearly 4.5 years after the crime, Leith's trial finally began. By this time, the Budget Lodge Hotel where the couple had stayed had closed down. Leith maintained his innocence, while the prosecutor described the events as a tragic and ugly culmination of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney highlighted the lack of concrete evidence, including witnesses and physical proof, and disputed the prosecution's speculations. The defense attorney brought to attention a crucial piece of evidence, a fingerprint found on the bed frame that did not belong to Leith, suggesting the possibility of an alternate perpetrator. He also mentioned that Sony had been involved with other men in the past, which could have led to her murder. The attorney emphasized that Leith had no prior arrests for domestic violence against Sony. Furthermore, he revealed that Sony had moved back in with Leith due to a rat infestation at a relative's house where she was previously staying. On February 6th, a video was shown in court, which captured Leith using a prepaid Sony card just 4 days after the murder. While the defense team suggested that Leith's calm behavior during the transaction suggested he was innocent, the prosecution saw it as a sign of a cold-blooded and ruthless individual who was unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7, 2014, Leith was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 3 days later, on February 10th, Leith appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had made an error by considering his past history of domestic violence, and that the evidence presented was insufficient. However, on July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentence. The case of Summer Baldwin. Summer Baldwin, born in 1976 in Washington, was renowned for her kind and vibrant personality. As a bright student with many friends, she aspired to pursue an acting career. Following high school, Summer enrolled in community college but struggled with her studies. Seeking a change of environment and new opportunities, she moved to Texas with her friends, supported by her parents who hoped she could start anew. However, it is uncertain when Summer's life started to decline. She struggled with addiction to alcohol and illicit drugs, but unfortunately did not reach out to her family for support. As her addiction worsened, she lost her job and began associating with people who had a history of crime. Her dreams of becoming an actress were shattered, and she was eventually forced to work as an escort to make ends meet. Summer's parents remained oblivious to their daughter's struggles, believing she was living a successful life. The information provided about Summer's friends was limited. However, a significant detail emerged. A few months before her death, Summer had been a key witness in a major federal counterfeiting case. This revelation suggested that her murder might have been a contract killing by a criminal gang, drawing the attention of the FBI and putting the investigation under intense scrutiny. The investigation led to the first suspects. Rebecca, Summer's best friend, was called in for questioning by the police. She provided insight into Summer's occupation and mentioned several of her boyfriends, one of whom had a history of aggressive behavior, including physical abuse and persistent stalking after their breakup. This man became the initial suspect in the case. Summer's ex-boyfriend was detained and brought to the station on the same day. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in the case and appeared genuinely surprised and distraught upon learning of Summer's death. Furthermore, he had a solid alibi for the night before the tragedy, having been involved in a drunken brawl at a bar and spending the night in a cell with another individual. As a result, the police were forced to release the first and, at the time, only suspect. Another friend and colleague of Summer named Marguerite provided crucial information to the investigation. Marguerite reported that she saw Summer on the evening of September 11th at a convenience store parking lot. They had a brief conversation. Marguerite recalled that a red van pulled into the parking lot, and a young, physically fit Latino man got out to enter the store, likely to make a purchase. While he was inside, Summer exited the van from the passenger side to greet Marguerite. Summer mentioned that the man was a client she had met for the second time in recent days. After the man returned to the van, he got behind the wheel, and Summer quickly re-entered the vehicle. Marguerite didn't notice which direction the van took when it left, nor did she know where Summer and the man were headed. She noted that she had never seen the man before and thought he was not from the area. Her description of him was limited due to the darkness, but she remembered that he had very short hair, similar to a military style. On September 13, 2005, a sanitation worker discovered a suspicious suitcase in a landfill in Lubbock City, Texas, USA. When he opened the suitcase, he was startled to see the body of a woman with red hair. The victim's body had many bruises. The victim's leg was tattooed with the word "Summer." The suitcase, which tragically became her coffin, presented a peculiar appearance. Externally, it was covered in garbage and waste, yet surprisingly, it showed no signs of wear and tear, and its wheels appeared brand new. Upon closer inspection, the interior revealed perfectly intact tags and a lining that seemed untouched, giving the impression that the suitcase was brand new. Notably, the plastic attachment for the price tag remained intact, suggesting that the purchaser had not removed it. Further investigation revealed that this particular brand of suitcase was widely available in numerous stores throughout the city. However, this specific large model was only sold in 2 stores. A crucial breakthrough came when the perfectly preserved barcode led investigators to a Walmart store in the same area where Summer was last seen alive. Records showed that 2 identical suitcases were purchased on the day preceding the gruesome discovery, one in the afternoon and the other around 2 a.m., a timing that raised suspicions due to its unusual nature. Police officers promptly visited the store and obtained the surveillance camera footage. After reviewing the footage, they discovered that an elderly couple had purchased the first suitcase. Initially, they didn't raise any suspicions, but they were tracked down and were able to present the suitcase, explaining that it was bought for a vacation. However, the second suitcase was purchased by a young, athletic Latino man with very short hair, similar to a military haircut. This raised suspicions that he might be the person seen with Summer in the supermarket parking lot, as described by a witness. Additionally, the man bought disposable gloves at checkout, further arousing suspicions. The store's external surveillance cameras provided more information, showing the man leaving the store with the suitcase and loading it into a red van. With too many coincidences, the police believed they had identified the suspect and now needed to confirm his identity, locate him, and bring him in for questioning. The man took extreme precautions to avoid detection, using cash instead of a credit card to prevent leaving a digital trail. However, he overlooked the parking lot surveillance cameras, which clearly captured his vehicle's license plate number. The police quickly tracked the vehicle to a rental car company and identified the renter as Rosendo Rodriguez, a reservist in the U.S. Marine Corps. Rosendo had a clean record and was in town for a brief training stint with his unit. Initially, it was difficult for the police to locate Rosendo, as he wasn't staying at the same hotel as his unit. But with his personal details in hand, the police discovered that he had withdrawn a large sum of cash from an ATM at a different hotel, likely the money used to purchase the suitcase and gloves. Further investigation revealed that Rosendo had checked into this hotel under the name Thomas Rosendo, matching his physical description, on September 11th. It appeared that Rosendo had used an alias for unknown reasons. The investigation got a lucky break. Although Rosendo had already checked out of his hotel room, it hadn't been cleaned yet, and it contained crucial evidence. The carpet, bed, and walls had brown stains and splatters that looked like dried blood. A tag from a new suitcase was found near the bed. The trash had used contraceptives and disposable gloves in it. Forensic analysis confirmed the dried blood belonged to Summer. DNA on the contraceptives and gloves matched both Summer and Rosendo. This proved they had found the killer. However, Rosendo had already left the city by then. With this information, it was easy to track him down. Rosendo Rodriguez was born on March 26, 1980, in Wichita Falls, Texas. He came from a low-income family of Mexican immigrants and had a difficult childhood. His father, who struggled with alcoholism, was abusive to his wife and children. As a result, Rosendo was exposed to violence from an early age. He was aggressive and frequently got into fights at school. However, as he matured, he learned to manage his anger. After finishing high school, Rosendo attended Texas Tech University. He lived on his own and worked various jobs, including at a pizzeria and as an office clerk. Eventually, he decided to join the U.S. Marine Corps. His colleagues in the military described him as calm, disciplined, and reliable. They also saw him as a good friend who was always willing to help. Rosendo was well-educated and physically attractive, making him popular with women. On September 15th, Rosendo was arrested at his home in San Antonio. When the police arrived, he remained calm and seemed unaware of the seriousness of the situation. During the search, the police found a striped shirt and shorts that matched the outfit he wore when buying a suitcase. This was caught on surveillance footage. The police also seized his laptop and mobile phone. Initially, Rosendo refused to speak and denied any involvement in Summer Baldwin's murder for several weeks. However, faced with overwhelming evidence against him, he began to provide statements on the advice of his attorney. In these statements, he shared his own account of events, which notably diverged from the reconstruction put together by forensic experts. Rosendo initially stayed at a different hotel than his fellow servicemen due to a booking mistake. Although he realized the error after checking in, he chose not to relocate since the military leadership deemed it unnecessary. However, he failed to explain why he used a different name to register at the hotel on September 10th. That evening, Rosendo rented a van to get around the city more easily. He claimed to have met Summer Baldwin by coincidence. According to his account, he spotted a blonde woman sitting on a roadside bench, covering her face with her hands and seemingly crying. Concerned, he pulled over to check on her and see if she needed assistance. They started talking, and after she calmed down, they went to his hotel room, where they chatted, had a few drinks, but did not engage in any intimate activities. The next morning, Rosendo drove Summer home. They made plans to meet again in the evening. At around 9 p.m., he picked her up from the same location and they went to a supermarket. There, Summer ran into her friend Marjorie. Afterward, they returned to the hotel. According to Rosendo, he and Summer engaged in consensual intimacy at the hotel. However, the situation took a turn when Summer allegedly became aggressive and demanded money. This caught Rosendo off guard, as he claimed he was unaware that Summer was a sex worker. When he refused to pay, Summer reportedly pulled out a knife and threatened him. Rosendo managed to disarm her and punched her in the face, causing her nose to bleed. He claimed that he was acting in self-defense and did not intend to harm her. Shortly after, Summer collapsed onto the bed and began convulsing, foaming at the mouth. Rosendo stated that he attempted to help her but was hesitant to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation due to the blood and foam on her face. After a minute, Summer stopped breathing. Realizing Summer was dead, Rosendo panicked. He went to a nearby store, purchased a suitcase and gloves, and returned to the hotel. He then placed Summer's body in the suitcase and disposed of it in a dumpster, knowing it would be taken to the landfill the next morning. Afterward, he checked out of the hotel, returned the rental car, and drove back to San Antonio, pretending as though nothing had happened. Inconsistencies in the suspect's story raised suspicions among investigators. Rosendo Rodriguez's lies were evident due to numerous discrepancies in his account. One inconsistency arose when Marjorie, who met Summer in the parking lot on the night of the crime, stated that Summer mentioned the man was a client she had previously met for a paid encounter. However, Rosendo claimed their interaction was consensual, which contradicts evidence on Summer's body indicating she was taken advantage of. It is possible their initial encounter was consensual, leading Summer to agree to meet him again. Rosendo also claimed he only hit Summer once to calm her down, and she died from a seizure. But the autopsy revealed around 30 fresh bruises on Baldwin's head and body, as well as several stab wounds. Furthermore, evidence indicates she was alive when he packed her into the suitcase, which contradicts his claim that she was already dead. A search of Rosendo's laptop revealed a disturbing information in the days leading up to his arrest. He had been actively searching for information about Summer, including whether she was being searched for and if her body had been found in a landfill. Rosendo also frequently searched for information on Joanna Catherine Rogers, a 16-year-old girl from Lubbock who had gone missing a year and a half prior. Rosendo agreed to a plea deal that included a reduced sentence and no death penalty in exchange for explaining what happened to Joanna. He said he met Joanna, a high school student, in late April 2004. After a few meetings, they went to his hotel room on May 4th, where they got into an argument over money and potential rape allegations. The argument escalated, and Rosendo panicked, covering Joanna's mouth to quiet her, which unintentionally led to her death. In a desperate attempt to dispose of the body, Rosendo put it in his suitcase and threw it into a dumpster. This was the same method he used a year and a half later to dispose of Summer's body. Initially, Rosendo admitted to these events but later claimed his confession was false and that he had been coerced into making it. The police realized they needed to find Joanna's body to build a stronger case, so they launched a massive search of the city dump. Over a year later, they made a miraculous discovery, a suitcase containing Joanna's remains, despite severe decomposition. DNA testing confirmed the identity of the remains. This new evidence allowed authorities to charge Rosendo as a serial offender with a consistent modus operandi, committing similar heinous crimes. During the trial, the verdict was clear: Rosendo was guilty of first-degree murder. The court decided on the death penalty, largely due to the fact that Summer Baldwin was 3 months pregnant when she was murdered. This aggravating factor was a key consideration in the sentencing. Rosendo was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Rosendo and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, claiming errors and misconduct by investigators. However, all appeals were rejected. While on death row, Rosendo maintained a blog on criminal justice and policy issues. On March 27, 2018, Rosendo Rodriguez was executed for his crimes at Huntsville Prison in Texas, one day after his 38th birthday. This marked the 4th execution in Texas and the 7th in the United States that year, nearly a decade after his conviction. The case of Maria Lattenberger. Maria Lattenberger, a 19-year-old from Freiburg, sparked widespread outrage in German society and raised serious concerns about the local police and the German government as a whole. Born on December 6, 1996, to Clemens and Frederica Lattenberger, Maria's parents were both lawyers, with her father holding a high-ranking position in the European Union. At the time of her death, Maria was a medical student at the University of Freiburg. In addition to her studies, she volunteered part-time at a local center that provided aid to immigrants. On the night of October 15, 2016, Maria attended a party hosted by the medical faculty, where she socialized with friends until around 2:30 a.m. Since she lived on campus, approximately 3 miles from the university, she decided to ride her bike back to her dorm. Tragically, at 2:37 a.m., Maria was last seen riding her bike towards campus. Several hours later, at 8:20 a.m., a jogger discovered her lifeless body in the River Dreisam, about a mile away from where she was last seen. Despite an immediate call to the police and ambulance, medical professionals were unable to revive her. The incident raised numerous questions about the efficiency of the local authorities and the government's response to similar cases. During the forensic examination, investigators determined that Maria's death was caused by drowning. Additionally, they found evidence that someone had attempted to strangle her with a scarf, which was discovered at the scene. The scarf contained a sample of male DNA, believed to belong to the perpetrator. Near the crime scene, police found several black hairs, 7 inches long, with bleached ends in the bushes. The hairs had roots, allowing authorities to obtain another sample of male DNA. This sample matched the one found on the scarf used to strangle Maria. Despite this evidence, the police were unable to identify the owner of the DNA samples, as no matching information existed in their databases. On November 8th, the authorities offered a €6,000 reward for information that could help solve the case. Thanks to several individuals, the reward amount was soon increased to €35,000. The police conducted an extensive investigation into Maria's death, questioning over 1,000 people, including those who attended her last party. Additionally, more than 100 individuals voluntarily submitted DNA samples for comparison. However, none of the DNA samples from party attendees matched the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, leaving the police without a DNA match. The public was shocked and alarmed when the details of Maria's death were published in the press, and as a result, residents of Freiburg rushed to buy pepper sprays, fearing for their safety, since the perpetrator was still at large. There was also an increase in reports of women being harassed in the city, with 2 similar incidents occurring in the same area, one just days before Maria's death and another 2 weeks prior. As a consequence, self-defense classes became extremely popular in Freiburg, with many people enrolling in local sports centers to learn how to protect themselves. Meanwhile, to boost security, 25 extra police officers have been deployed to patrol the city streets. Due to the high crime rate, many people are too intimidated to venture out alone at night. The police pursued all potential clues, but the breakthrough in identifying the perpetrator came from the hair and scarf found at the crime scene. With the description of the sought-after individual being a male with long black hair featuring bleached ends, the authorities began scrutinizing footage from numerous city cameras. Upon reviewing the CCTV recordings from the city tram, they spotted a man with a similar hair color and length. The individual in question sported an undercut hairstyle, characterized by short hair on the sides and back, and longer hair on top. This particular footage was captured on the night of October 16th at 7 a.m., approximately 40 minutes prior to Maria's departure from the party. The suspect boarded a tram near the university and, after a 20-minute ride, disembarked at the final stop, which was less than a mile from the location where a jogger subsequently discovered Maria's body. Notably, the suspect had harassed 2 girls on the tram, though they eventually managed to extricate themselves from his unwanted attention. On December 3rd, 2016, nearly 7 weeks after Maria's death, the police arrested 17-year-old Hussein Kavari as a suspect. Initially, authorities believed him to be an immigrant from Afghanistan. However, during the investigation, it emerged that he was not 17 and not from Afghanistan. Kavari had entered Germany in November 2015 without an ID card, claiming to be from Afghanistan and born in 1999. Kavari said he was 16 when he arrived, but he lacked documents to support or disprove this. Due to his claimed age, Germany granted him asylum as an underage unaccompanied refugee. He was placed with a foster family in a scenic town near the Black Forest, where he attended school, learned German, and received government benefits. It turned out that fabricating his age was a common tactic, which provided advantages not only when applying for asylum, but also in case of committing crimes, as juvenile offenders face less severe punishment. The suspect's age will be revisited later, as it's just one aspect of his troubled biography. After the police arrested Hussein Kavari as the prime suspect in the Maria Ladenburger case, his image was published in the media. Although German media outlets blurred his face, TV channels and newspapers in other European countries did not, publishing unobstructed pictures of him. A Greek lawyer, Maria Eleni Nenkop, recognized Kavary after seeing his photos in the media. She had previously defended him in court in the spring of 2013, when he was charged and found guilty of a life-threatening attack on a young student on the Greek island of Corfu. Kavary claimed his father had died many years ago in Afghanistan, but the police discovered his father was actually alive and living in Iran. The court was able to determine Kavary's age more accurately after the prosecutor contacted his father by phone. According to his father, Kavary was born in Iran on January 29, 1984, which made him 32 years old at the time of Maria's death. As a result, he was tried as an adult. During the trial, Kavary stated that a few hours before the attack, he and his friends had consumed a large amount of alcohol and taken prohibited substances. After partying, he took a tram to the area where he later attacked Maria. In her free time, Maria worked part-time at the Immigrant Assistance Center in Freiburg, where she tried to help people in difficult life situations. Ironically, she was killed by one of the people she was trying to help. The crime sparked widespread public outrage and disgust, prompting social media users to post sarcastic thank you messages to Chancellor Angela Merkel, criticizing her liberal policy that allowed over 1 million refugees and immigrants into the country. During the trial, Prosecutor Ertberer emphasized to the 2 jurors and 3 judges that the focus was on the criminal offender, not Germany's refugee policy. Kavary broke down in court as he read a heartfelt apology to the victim's family. He claimed to be haunted by nightmares of Maria's death every day. "I offer my sincerest apologies to Maria's family," he said. "I wish I could turn back time and undo the harm I've caused. I'm deeply remorseful for my actions, and the guilt is consuming me from the inside out. The agony of what I've done is destroying my life, piece by piece." Hussein Kavary shared his harrowing journey from Iran to Germany, highlighting struggles in Greece and Slovenia. He spoke candidly about scavenging for food, engaging in illegal activities, and living with a foster family in Germany, where he turned to substances and alcohol. Kavary revealed psychological issues, including nightmares and insomnia, stemming from concerns about his homeland. Kavary recalled killing Maria Ladenberger after a night of heavy drinking and drug use. He harassed girls on a tram, then stole a bike but fell off due to intoxication. That's when he saw Maria, pushed her off the bike, and strangled her with a scarf until she lost consciousness. He was attracted to her beauty and took advantage of her state. He carried her into the water, where she drowned. Kavary claimed he was too intoxicated to control his actions, but prosecutors argued his actions were deliberate and premeditated. A psychiatric expert told the court that, in their professional opinion, Kavary's display of remorse was not genuine. They testified that Kavary had consistently shown a strong tendency towards violence and warned that there was a high risk of him committing another offense. The expert also stated that Kavary had a fascination with aggressive sexual practices and held hostile views towards women. Furthermore, they noted that Kavary lacked remorse and compassion for the harm and suffering he had caused to others. Maria's parents hired a lawyer to represent them at the trial, opting out of attending due to concerns about emotional statements from victims' families influencing the outcome. They also wanted to avoid media hype and politics. They considered meeting the perpetrator, but decided against it, believing Maria wouldn't want them to, and that it wouldn't achieve anything positive. On Sept 22, 2018, Judge Catherine Shank found Hussein Kavary guilty. Before sentencing, Kavary was handcuffed and wore a black hooded jumper, showing a lack of empathy that drew applause. He received a life imprisonment sentence, but under German law, he's eligible for early release after 15 years if deemed no longer a threat. However, Judge Shank emphasized the severity of his guilt, making early release unlikely. The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago. Her parents divorced when she was 16, but they remained close to her. The divorce had a significant impact on Kelly's life. A year after her parents' divorce, Kelly graduated from high school without a clear plan for her future. To delay her decision to go to college, she worked part-time at a local restaurant. 6 years later, in 2008, Kelly, then 22, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to start afresh. She enrolled in college, became a yoga instructor, and found a job as a saleswoman to cover her living expenses. She also worked as a nanny to earn extra income. Kelly often visited trendy places around town, creating memorable experiences. When she met her father a month ago, she was living in Milwaukee, and her life was going well. At that time, Kelly was a successful yoga instructor and a popular employee at a sports store. Kelly seemed content with her life, enjoying her job and a year-long relationship with Chris Zacco, a 38-year-old IT manager for a transportation company. Chris had graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business and had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for work. He was a hardworking, decent man from a good family who shared Kelly's interests in sports and entertainment. Kelly and Chris seemed to get along well. Chris had built a successful career, owned a luxury apartment, an expensive car, and a large fortune that he had earned himself. Kelly's father approved of him, seeing him as a great match for his daughter. On October 12, 2013, Kelly was nowhere to be seen at work. She was well liked for her punctuality and work ethic, so this struck everyone as odd. Her colleagues tried to contact her, but her cell phone was silent. She was also inactive on social media. Kelly had never left her phone behind before. She simply disappeared, and her loved ones contacted the police to file a missing persons report. However, during the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals who might want to harm her. All of her belongings were still at home, so police ruled out the possibility that she left voluntarily. What was concerning was that her bank account, phone, and other accounts had no activity. Police suspected that Kelly was in trouble. Since Chris was the last person to see her on October 10, 2013, investigators brought him in for questioning. Chris stated that he and Kelly spent time at his apartment in Lafayette Towers, then went to a nearby bar, socialized, and drank. They returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m., had a good time, and went to bed. At 9 a.m., Kelly left Chris's apartment, and they never saw each other again. Chris insisted that Kelly was not his girlfriend, saying they had an open relationship. He also revealed that he was in love with someone else and had plans for a future with her. This raised suspicions among investigators, who found Chris's story plausible but noted inconsistencies in his words and actions. To investigate further, detectives interviewed friends who had been with Kelly and Chris the night before Kelly went missing. These friends confirmed that the group had a good time at a bar and then ordered pizza, eating it on a bench outside. Kelly seemed to be in a good mood, sharing her plans for the next day, which included sleeping in, doing yoga, doing laundry, and relaxing. Chris and Kelly left for his apartment that night, where they met another friend who had been invited over for drinks. This friend reported feeling uncomfortable in Chris's apartment because she sensed tension between Chris and Kelly. She recalled that Chris was smoking and chatting with her while Kelly seemed upset. Assuming that Kelly was just tired, the friend thought little of it and left the apartment. However, after talking to Kelly's other friends, investigators discovered that Chris and Kelly were not on good terms. Kelly loves Chris very much. But unfortunately, Chris seems uninterested in their relationship. Chris does not make any long-term plans involving Kelly, which worries her. Kelly's friend, missing, suspects that Chris is being unfaithful and that their relationship will not last. As a result, Kelly loses hope for a future with Chris and begins to look for other options. She creates a profile on a dating website and starts chatting with various men, but she has yet to meet any of them in real life. Kelly's intention is to have a backup plan in case things do not work out with Chris. Additionally, her friends notice bruises on Kelly's arms and neck and ask her about them, but Kelly dismisses their concerns by downplaying the situation. Her friends suspect that the bruises may be a sign of domestic violence, but Kelly never confirms their suspicions. Meanwhile, investigators analyzed security footage from Chris's home. The footage showed Kelly and Chris coming home drunk one night, but Kelly was never seen leaving the apartment. This contradicted Chris's testimony that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It was later discovered that another friend of Chris's was at the apartment that night and admitted to using illegal drugs with Chris. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Chris's apartment and found numerous drugs, pills, pipes, and other paraphernalia, leading to Chris's arrest for possession. They also discovered a torn shower curtain that appeared to have been forcefully removed. During questioning, Chris remained calm and admitted to using drugs but denied distributing them. A search of his cell phone revealed disturbing content, including photos of an unconscious girl in bed and a video of Chris raping the girl, who appeared to have been strangled. This led to suspicions that Chris had drugged and exploited her. Evidence from Chris's phone was linked to Kelly's disappearance. Police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog, which responded to the bed and bathroom area before leading them to the front door. The dog then guided police to Chris's car in the parking lot and to a nearby dumpster. The investigation reached a critical stage when investigators believed Kelly had been murdered. Kelly's boyfriend, Chris, became the prime suspect, as evidence suggested he was the last person to see her alive. It is believed that he spent time with Kelly in his apartment before secretly moving her body into his car, a plan that would have escaped the building's 28 surveillance cameras. During the investigation, police analyzed Chris's computer and discovered child pornography. This led to Chris being charged with possession of the images, but he was released on bail and is awaiting trial. The investigation continues as authorities attempt to find Kelly's body and gather enough evidence to build a stronger case against Chris. It should be noted that Chris had claimed to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and investigators quickly began gathering information about that woman. The investigation uncovered the identity of a woman named Megan, with whom Chris had been secretly in a 3-year relationship, unbeknownst to Kelly, similar to the relationship he had with Kelly. Police came to interview Megan and showed her photos of Chris' apartment. After a thorough inspection, Megan found several items missing, including a shower curtain in the bathroom, a rug, several towels, and the large golf bag that was usually kept in the bedroom. Detectives believe Kelly could fit in the large bag Megan reported missing. After examining the building's entrances and exits, police found a side path that Chris could have taken to get to his car without being seen by surveillance cameras. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, Chris was seen arriving at the house with the large bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. At 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, Chris left the house in his car. Just 2 minutes later, at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone lost connection at the same location. Over the next 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips between his home and his car, loading up on belongings, before leaving for good at 6:16 p.m. Chris did not return home until the next day. When investigators asked him what he had been doing the previous day, he said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's house. However, no one found this explanation credible. Chris was supposed to meet Megan at 7:30 that evening, but he arrived more than an hour late. Detectives suspected that he was looking for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which would explain his delay. Unfortunately, they were unable to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the morning. As an IT expert, Chris would have known that his phone records could be used to track him. Megan reported that Chris seemed very strange that night. He appeared restless and anxious, and he said that his phone was not working, which was why he was late. After the date, Megan and Chris went to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. According to Megan, Chris was extremely stressed, had not slept at all, and was sweating so much that she had to change the sheets in the morning. Investigators believe that Chris was worried because he still had Kelly's body in the trunk of his car and was afraid of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide her body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left after trying to convince her to temporarily move to Denver, but she refused. Police tracked Chris's location history using his car's GPS, which led them to a cheese shop called Cheese House, 80 miles from Milwaukee. However, it seemed unlikely that Chris would have driven that far just to buy cheese. Chris claimed that he had bought cheese for his parents, presenting a receipt for the cheese at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th, which his parents confirmed. However, the police found it difficult to believe Chris's story, as the same cheese could easily be purchased at a nearby supermarket. They suspected that Chris might have dumped Kelly's body in the area around the cheese store. Further investigation revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers that afternoon. Detectives suspected that Chris had deliberately discarded his old shoes, possibly to avoid leaving blood or footprints that could be linked to the crime scene. It appeared that he had carefully planned to destroy evidence and create an alibi for himself. Chris, with his analytical mind, had tried to commit the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to spot inconsistencies in his story. Notably, it took him over 2 hours to travel from the cheese house to the sports store, a distance of about 80 kilometers, when it would normally take only an hour. This significant time difference suggests that Chris spent an additional hour on another activity, possibly hiding the body. Police speculate that he may have dumped the body along the way. However, the exact location of the body remains unknown. With a large search area spanning 50 miles, finding the body proved to be a huge challenge. A roadside search eventually led to a discovery. In a wooded area approximately 37 miles from the city, a local resident found human remains while walking. Upon discovery, the resident immediately contacted the sheriff's office. Dental records confirmed the remains were those of Kelly Dwyer. This discovery finally ended Kelly's parents' long and agonizing search for their daughter. The next step was to secure justice by determining the exact cause of her death. Based on available information, the medical examiner believed she may have been strangled but not forcefully enough to fracture the hyoid bone. There was no direct evidence at the scene where Kelly's body was discovered, such as torn curtains, mats, towels, or bags. However, the position of the skeleton provided valuable insight. The body was found face down, with one arm trapped underneath and the legs bent in a way that suggested it had been hidden for some time after death. This finding further supported the theory that Kelly's body had been hidden in a golf bag. As evidenced by footage of Chris holding the bag and driving into the area where the body was discovered. While these findings were compelling, they were circumstantial and did not directly implicate Chris in Kelly's murder. Ultimately, it took 5 years for Chris to be formally charged in connection with Kelly's disappearance. The charges against him were manslaughter and concealment of a body, as investigators lacked specific evidence to prove intent. Theorizing about the events of that night, detectives speculated that Chris and Kelly had become intimate, but Chris got carried away with strangulation, leading to Kelly's death. The investigation revealed that Chris then ripped off the shower curtain, removed the rug and towels, wrapped Kelly's body, placed it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of it. Throughout the ordeal, Chris maintained his innocence in Kelly's murder. Key evidence was presented at Chris's trial, including CCTV footage, cell phone video of the strangulation, and the search of his apartment by a dog. Megan, who testified against Chris, reported that he was extremely anxious on the day of the incident and was late for a meeting. Additionally, Chris's former girlfriends took the stand, expressing their concerns about his unhealthy obsession with strangulation and rough sex, which had frightened them. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence linking Chris to the crime and that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture. Chris had a clean record before the drug possession incident and was a successful IT professional with a stable job. The defense argued that Chris was incapable of murder. However, it was discovered that not all the CCTV footage had been saved, casting doubt on the prosecution's conclusion that Kelly had not left Chris's house. The defense presented a witness who claimed to have seen a girl resembling Kelly in another man's car the weekend after she went missing. Although the witness had previously seen Kelly on TV as a missing person, he was not 100% sure it was her. The defense offered an alternative explanation for Kelly's disappearance, suggesting that she may have left Chris's apartment safely but was later caught by one of her new boyfriends. The defense also questioned the reliability of the police dog during the investigation. Since the dog's reaction was not captured on video, its alert was based solely on the police officer's subjective interpretation. In response, the prosecution argued that the investigation using the sniffer dog was conducted objectively and transparently, with multiple police officers present and agreeing on the results. Ultimately, the prosecution convinced the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. With no other obvious suspects, the prosecution argued that Chris had planned and executed the crime carefully, deliberately destroying evidence to cover his tracks. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Chris guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. The Kelly family and the prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence of 48 years, while the defense asked for a reduced sentence of 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, then 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, including 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing a body. In addition, Chris Sacco was sentenced to 19 years for possession of child pornography and possession of narcotics, based on the outcome of his November 2014 trial. Chris Sacco is currently serving his sentence at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065, when he turns 93, essentially making his sentence a life sentence. Chris Sacco was unhappy with the sentence and attempted to appeal, but his appeal was rejected.